I think that's why he is obsessed with attaining Greenland, which I think is like
I love that.
I think it's like, so here's the thing. If the people of Greenland want to become a part of the United States, then they should be they should be allowed to
Dude,
become
they
the
do.
United
Have you seen the
States.
videos?
I think there's like, I'll push back on it. I actually don't think they want to be.
Based on what?
I think there was a Fox News video that just came out. They were going around and people were just like, no. But then I saw like, the Nelk guys like Kyle and they went, and some people were like, yeah, we want to be in Greenland. But, I want to see some polling first. I just want to see like more information about that. But
we're going to send you there. You come back and tell us.
Okay.
It's like it's a Warhawk's wet dream. I mean, what I mean? It's like the Cheneys are buying condos.
Mike Spear, Rotimi Adeoye.
What's up, man?
Welcome, boys.
Hello.
Interesting times right now, fellas.
A lot of stuff's going on, man.
A lot of stuff's going on. And actually, Rotimi, this was your idea to do this. You and I talked literally, I think, like a week after the election. It's a very refreshing conversation, too. We'll get to all, the background with you and things in the past. But, like, Senator Mike Spear, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
As well.
It's great to be back.
Yeah, old fan favorite, episode 39, episode 128. People know Mike Spear likes to throw down, so we'll have fun. And then Rotimi, you were on episode 125 as well. That was right. We put that out right when the midterms were happening back in 2022. But obviously, the world is a very different place now. And I really, if you don't mind me opening this, just to give you a little context from my end, I really, really liked your tweets that started immediately after the election happened. Because for full background, Mike, you are a very conservative guy. Rotimi, you are a liberal guy. And obviously the Democrats got killed in this election. It was not a good showing for them. And I think one of the things that when you and I spent the day together a couple years ago that I was thinking is that you, like pretty much everyone, now I would say in both parties, but for a long time it was more of a problem on the left side, you felt to me like anytime you were going to think something that was different than the party line, you felt pressured not to do that. So when I saw you after the election thinking for yourself with common liberal sense, like the kind that I like to see, I really like that. And I think this is a positive time for young leaders like you when the Democrat Party is essentially where the Republicans were in 2012, having their dark moment, to see people like you have more of a voice at the table. So I think today we can accomplish some of that for sure.
Sounds good, man.
All right, cool. So let's just get started off with this election. Spear, did you see this coming?
No, I didn't. Initially, I thought, the Trump era was over. It's CC, candidate and culture. So the Democrats failed. They ran the wrong candidate, and the culture that they put at the forefront of their campaign didn't resonate. At least that's my take on it. And it took me a while to realize it. I didn't think it was over until I was watching the news. I voted. I voted at the Revolutionary History Museum. It's the only time I go there. Until I'm like 70 and get a discount, that's the only time I'm going to go. And I got home, and it was MSNBC. We were talking about it. And it was just this fever of they're still voting. The lines are around the corner in Philadelphia. There was not a person in line before me to vote. And that's when I was like, okay. I'm like, this doesn't feel the same. That's really when I knew for the first time. I was like, oh, he's winning.
Yeah. What about you, Rotimi?
Yeah, I think there are two really good books I'd recommend for anyone who wants to understand the election. The first one is called Expanding Democratic Majority by Ruth Teixeira. Second one is called The Last Politician. It's about Joe Biden. I think the first book is important because it basically is this vision that Democratic strategists put out after Obama won. And it was this idea that essentially the country was going to become more diverse. And since the country was going to become more racially diverse, you would basically win unlimited elections and you never have any problem. Obviously, that book is like basically ridiculous now, and the whole thesis is like, but I think it's important for people to read because you kind of understand why things are so bad. And the second book about Joe Biden is really interesting because it really breaks down, I think, how his ego really informs a lot of his decisions. And for me, the biggest reason why the Democrats lost were those kind of two things crashing together at the same time. This focus on racial politics and using that as a strategy to turn out voters and it failing. And then also I think Joe Biden's ego and his refusal to step aside and have a primary process. I think there's so many I think I join in this online too. Like there are a lot of Democrats that are online talking about like the party needs to go more left or right or moderate. And I think like all those conversations are like fun and fine, but like that's what happens during a primary.
Yes.
And so like when you never have that primary, you get the result that happened. Kamala Harris ran a 100-day campaign that was like very thrown together, didn't really make a lot of sense message-wise. And so we got what we got. And, I think this is a really instructive moment for Democrats to sit back and listen to voters and try to figure out how can we actually be a party that wins.
Yeah, there's 2 points in there that bear a little more analysis. So, number one, what was the name of the book you said they wrote after Obama?
So it's called Expanding the Democratic Majority.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the way I translate that based on what they're talking about America becoming more diverse is that then became the basis of what turned into, say, like woke politics.
Totally.
And I think what happened there is it seems obvious now is that you saw a lot of people from all different races eventually turned off by the constant reminder of their race or their gender or their sexual orientation to the point that they're like, that's not, all right, great, we're that, whatever insert is here. But like, we care about the economy. We care about not having endless wars. We care about the border being secure. And suddenly it's like that the Democrats' message was woke and abortions. Which, they have a point on the abortions thing just because Roe v. Wade was obviously the law of the land for a long time, but that got interesting. The second thing is that when you look at the Democratic primary process, the last 3, it's reasonable to say they basically haven't let it happen. Bernie, we know, got pushed out from the WikiLeaks leaked emails and everything. And then he got pushed out again in 2020, right when the pandemic started, and all the candidates dropped out and endorsed Joe Biden. And then this year, they didn't even let it happen. And I know like RFK had some controversy around like some of his stances on things, but you have a Kennedy here, a true old school moderate liberal who people liked. And if they had opened up the primary process, even if that wasn't the DNC's favorite candidate, they could have had a different outcome here, don't you think? Yeah,
so I think something that I've been really trying to push folks that I know that are working for the DNC is trying to restore some of that process. One of the biggest issues that really stood out to me was usually the first state in the Democratic primary process is in Iowa. And that's a really important state because those are voters that tend to just really vote for politicians that speak to them and reach them for their concerns. So you get candidates like Obama. You get really these star-studded figures that really you don't think are going to win the election, but they pop out really well because they reach voters. And what the Democratic Party did with Joe Biden this time around is they put the first state to South Carolina. The reason why that was really disastrous for me, from my perspective, was because you have a lot of political leaders in that state who are very, very much kind of have this hold on how primary voters vote. So once you make the first state South Carolina, which I think it still is, you basically are telling all the voters in South Carolina that the precinct leaders are going to pick the person.
Yes.
And so I think it's just an example of how they're trying to control the process. And that's something that I think they really need to change. And I think if they don't change, you're going to keep getting more Joe Bidens. And I mean this sense, this like establishment figure that no one really can relate to because they're picked by the Democratic establishment.
Yeah, and they also picked a guy, I mean, he was gone. He was going in 2020, and that's another thing that I think has really offended the intelligence of the general public, in that you had all these Democrats right when the election was going the wrong way suddenly being like, oh my God, he can't do it. And people are like, yo, where you been? Like, he was tripping over words 5 years ago. And I always tell this story for context. The last time I stood by Joe Biden was in 2014, because I used to caddy for someone close to him all the time at Wellington Country Club. And so I see all the Secret Service golf carts coming up. He's the vice president, so I know he's there. We're down on the practice tee on a Saturday morning. There's a ton of people there. And I hear this guy behind me like, hey, Jim, how's your ass? Like, fucking talking everyone up. And it's Joe Biden. And he walks up, and I'm looking at him like, this motherfucker's like 70, 71 years old, but he's like kind of yoked. He gets up there striping it 240, 240, 250, 250, and like talking to people in between. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, damn, like he's old, but like he could run for office. And then I saw his first opening speech in March 2019, I believe it was, which is like not even 5 years later. And I was like, he must have had like 12 brain aneurysms. Like something was wrong. So, you know, if you're going to be the Democrats and you're even going to like get around the primary process, you got to pick someone who's like a functional fucking human being. You know, there were better, like even a newer guy, like that guy from Maryland. What's his name again?
Governor Westmore.
Yeah, like,
fantastic guy. Fantastic.
He
governor.
has one brain cell in him has more IQ than Kamala and Biden put together. You know what I mean? Like, Mike, do you think the Democrats are, I had said it earlier, but you think they're in a pretty similar spot the Republicans were in 2012?
No, but you gotta you gotta go back. First of all, Joe Biden was remember the Member Berries South Park episode? Classic. Joe Biden was the member berry for the Democratic Party when he first ran. So what he was stability in the face of what was just a politically polarized society. There was turmoil, there was protesting. So he was the member bearer. You know, let's remember the Obama years. We had stability.
Honk for Biden.
Largely uncriticized. I don't want to start with my Obama shade, but a largely
may have to jump in there.
Uncriticized president, especially after he left. So I think he was the right candidate at the time, but then you subvert the primary process.
Yes.
You roll out a candidate, which I hate to admit, well, I don't have to admit anything, but I hate to tell you, if she had another 365 days, it wouldn't have helped her. We would have known her better, which
agree.
wasn't helpful. So, you know, I think that the Democrats will learn, and you know, I'm concerned because I think that it's from the ashes type of moment for them, and you know, we'll see what they roll out next. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, do you guys think I'm always curious on this, like I don't like the two-party system, right? But if you're going to have it, there's the yin and the yang, the push and the pull, the check to the balance on either side, regardless of like who's in power. Like the one needs the other to exist. But it's such a strange psychological phenomenon that each party has the goal of like hoping that the other didn't exist. So like right now, the shoe's on the foot of like the Democrats are in a weaker spot. 4 years ago, the shoe was on the foot. The Republicans were on the weaker spot. But like, I'll start with you, Rotimi. Do you think it is necessary? Like it would be a bad thing if suddenly the Democrats ruled everything, even if they did a lot of things you agreed with? Do you think that would be a slippery slope to like, I don't know, like human instincts?
Yeah, I think, you know, something that, and a lot of people don't like the two-party system, and I have issues with it too, but I think something that's good is a check on a party because it kind of brings you down back to earth a little bit, and it forces you to be like, okay, like I made the Democrats happy on this XYZ policy, but I need to go out and talk to folks that aren't Democrats and like see how I can get them on board back on my side with policy. So I think this is an issue, for example, on immigration. I think Democrats have really missed the mark there for a long time. And I think the main reason being is that you have a lot of advocacy groups that are much more on the far left side of the party that push politicians to take unpopular stances on immigration. When common sense legislation, such as having the border closed, deporting criminals, even though that's a crime under law, but it needs to be more enforced clearly. That's something
Wait, what do you mean that's a crime under law?
Well, I think, you know, it's already illegal, you know, to be in the country and to be undocumented and to commit a crime. That's obviously illegal. But I think something that Democrats forgot is talking about how that's wrong and how if someone is elected president as a Democrat, they're going to actually make sure they're going to carry out deporting people that are committing crimes in the country. I think Democrats very much stopped talking about that because you had far left interest groups that were pushing some politicians to take unpopular stances. That's something you saw in the Biden administration on immigration.
Yeah.
And so kind of to get back to your main question, I think, you know, that's why it's kind of good to have a good party system because if you a two-party system, because I think if you just had Democrats, you know, controlling everything, you would get really, really, I think like kind of out of touch policies that might be good, but that don't speak to people that might be in the middle.
Sure. I think that there's also, you talk about like far left groups entering that chat, so to speak. The narrative shifted so much from even the fact that like people like Hillary and Obama were saying things that were extremely similar to what Trump says as late as like 2014. And I'm not even faulting Obama for this. They called Obama like the deporter in chief. And, I don't, from a human rights perspective, you never want to see any of that violated. You like to see things done the right way. But we've also, like, I've had so many guys in here who have either worked on the border or reported on the border, all these different things, who have been telling me about this now over the last couple of years. And it's like, the system is so fucked up that people even before the first Trump administration were in a horrible position. And so when you then make it like, when you start screaming that any deportation is going to be like racist or something like that, it's actually racist to not look at it as something that we got to fix, because when you allow the border to be so open, you're creating humanitarian crises. I mean, some of the stories that I get and some of the pictures I've seen offline that we can't show on YouTube that some of my guys have seen is harrowing. And like some of these far left groups, I'd look at them and say, aren't you're preaching being human and love first? And this is a story that's not showing humanity and love, but simply because Orange Man says it, you have to take like the opposite stance. Can't you be common sense here and not have Trump derangement syndrome on it?
Yeah, I think that's something that I've really has frustrated me a little bit. Now, I think a lot of Democrats had this view on immigration that was very much stuck in the 2020 world, which was like, we were having this moment, George Floyd murder, horrific. And so I think some Democrats basically just decided that we were going to have positions that were really out of step with the American public, and that bleeded into some of the discourse around the 2024 election and the positions they took. But I think I hope that after this election, Democrats go, okay, like let's actually like go back to common sense immigration reform, which is like having a secure border. Don't skip the line. If you want to come to this country, you got skills, you got talent, like we want to bring you in, but like you can't skip the line. And that's an important rule to have because people don't like disorder, and we shouldn't want disorder at the border. So I hope we get back to that. And I think there are candidates that are going to come up that will realize it. And yeah.
Yeah. And I hope that, again, when I talk about like younger voices who are willing to speak up, on either party, becoming the rising stars, maybe someone like you, I hope that this is a moment where that's allowed to happen, because I feel like 2 years ago you would have been in a position where you wouldn't be able to say something like that out loud.
Yeah, I do think that there is – well, I think there are kind of two things happening in the party. There is a gerontocracy problem. Gerontocracy. So it's kind of this idea that you have a lot of older folks in the Democratic Party that are very much like kind of have a grip on it and aren't refusing to let it go.
There's like geriatric.
Yeah, basically.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, basically. And there's actually this really, it's kind of interesting. There's a book about Jimmy Carter where, there's there's a section where Joe Biden basically is thinking about primarying Jimmy Carter. And he's like, Jimmy Carter is this nice guy, but I'm a young senator and I have to stand up because I don't want to lose this election. And so he flies to New York and he meets with this young senator who just won his election. That guy's Chuck Schumer. And they basically talk about taking over the Democratic Party as young electeds, basically being like, we have to get rid of the Carter era. And every time
on the other foot now.
Exactly. Now, every time I read that, I'm like, oh, so Joe Biden wouldn't want me to be, nice to him if I was in his place. Like, he wouldn't want, I guess, the young Democrats to kind of just be like, oh, like, we're just going to let you guys like do whatever. So that's why I've been really clear, I think, with young folks that I know is like, you have to stand up and take the party back, right? Because at this point, it's just, we're in a tough spot.
Spear, if you were a Democrat for a second, I know that's impossible for you to imagine, but I want you to try. How would you fix the current Democratic Party?
Generally, we're not talking about the border.
You can talk about whatever you want, bro.
Well, I feel like you need an identity. You know, even like when we're talking about the border, I was thinking to myself, Democrats don't even know why they care about the border anymore. Is it human rights? You know, you have the one lady on The View who jumps out and says, yeah, we're going to lose all of our maids. I mean, what, you know, really, what are they looking to accomplish here? If it's a human rights issue, they failed. And it's, I get it, it's bipartisan and it's very difficult to address these issues. But I think they have to, generally speaking as well, figure out what is their identity. If it's a youthful identity, that's great. I mean, if that's the route they're going to go, I think if I was a Democrat, how I would fix the party is understand that we're not all poli-sci majors. We're not all, and I'm a poli-sci major. I'm sure you are too.
Yeah.
He's an African American studies minor.
Minor. I'll bring you up to speed.
Thank you.
On the culture.
I may need some help.
Yeah. But seriously, I mean, I think they need a fresh new identity. And when you say the youth, it concerns me because a lot of my friends, I shouldn't say a lot. I have friends who lean left and who are Democrats, and I mean, they have great ideas, they have great talking points, and generally, it's all about the money. It's all about stimulating the economy. It's all about making it more affordable to move into the house their parents moved in for $10,000. You know, I think that's the way the Democrats can really impress the rest of this country. So I'd like to see that shift. It's the whole Clinton identity, I guess. But
yes,
I think that's the route.
I say this often. You know, Bill Clinton's very entertaining, first of all, but you know, I would not call him a good guy. I'll put it that way. But when you look at his presidency and you look at presidents over the past century, he is literally the most moderate guy who was ever in there because he was a fucking backroom politician and he knew, let's make a deal, baby. Right? And at the end of the day, like the 1990s were a really fucking good time because of that. You know, and I think to that, and you can look at all the other stuff with the Clintons and everything, but there's something to be said for that because it got more down to business. And yet it feels like in society, we've reached a point where it's like tacky to talk about the economy being a main issue. The fact of the matter is, if I'm looking at a single mother who's working 2 jobs and suddenly groceries cost $125 instead of $100, well, now maybe her kids don't eat. Right? So when you go to that person and you say, I want you to care about abortion, or I want you to care about endless wars even, like something important like that, that's not necessarily what she's going to care about. She's going to care about more like, all right, how the fuck do I pay this on Monday, and who's going to be the best opportunity there for that to happen?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And there's now one story that comes to my mind. I was in Bucks County where I grew up, knocking doors for Vice President Harris during the campaign. And I get to the store. It's a really nice lady, and she realized I went to CBS, so we're making small talk. And I bring up, Harris campaign. And she goes, I was actually thinking about voting for Harris, but I saw her campaign with Liz Cheney, and I lost my son in the Middle East. So I don't think I can ever bring myself to vote for someone that associates with that family. And I just remember being like, I kind of can't blame you. And she closed the door, and I went about my day. And now looking back, I'm like, I should have realized that's when he was going to win. But I think that for me was, for some reason, Democrats have become more like culturally close with the Cheneys instead of poor people and working class people. And this like old era of politics, and that attachment I think has been politically damaging.
Great point.
And we need to get out of that. And I think the biggest way to get out of that is a lot of the folks from the last generation and that have been controlling the party, I think, need to step aside. But I do agree that talking more about the economy, talking about how you're going to make sure that people can afford to go about their day-to-day lives, afford to buy a house, I think that's one reason that Trump had a good campaign, because he was just talking about doing that stuff. And I mean, we got to see what he can do. Of course, but I really think he did have an economic message.
Yes.
And kind of had a story that made sense. On the other hand, I think Kamala Harris's message was this weird, like, the economic message was this, like, very confusing, like, opportunity economy thing, which didn't make sense. But I think Donald Trump's story of the economy was the Democrats overspent, they overheated. I'm going to come in, make everything simple, going to turn down the heat, and I'm going to make sure you have more money in your pocket. Simple message.
Yes.
And so I think we need to get back to that common sense economic message.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And you also raised the point about like Dick Cheney. This is where it felt like it was a giant troll on me, and I thought like fucking Ashton Kutcher was going to come out of the bushes and say, "You're punked." But like you had the Democratic Party bragging, and this happened in like a 1 week period, I think. You had them bragging about a Dick Cheney endorsement, an IRS endorsement, and a Diddy Party client's endorsement.
Jeez.
And I'm like, like you just hit the trifecta right there. It was almost like, you know, I had this crazy theory that even I didn't believe. And to this day, I don't even think I believe this. But I had this crazy theory back in September 2020. I was talking with my dad, and I knew Trump was going to lose. And I looked at everything that was happening. I didn't know what was what. I didn't know what was, you know, total conspiracy versus like things that were actually happening that he was responding bad to. But I said, you know, this guy is good for business. Hear me out here. He's good for business of the media. Their ratings are up 10,000%. You know, the media everywhere from every direction has some hand in hand with like intelligence and stuff like that, so they can get messaging out. And he's also really good for like the Schumers and Pelosi's of the world because they have a foil. They get to be we're fighting the power or whatever. We're fighting the bad orange man or what, and they get more attention. And I'm like, so what if all this is like people thinking, why have 8 years of Trump when you can have 12? Because he was still the main story for 4 years. That ended up becoming true. And then you see like when that guy, obviously January 6th, there was a lot of misinformation that happened there. I'm not saying it was a good day. I thought Trump was very stupid to like do that event that day because only bad things can happen. But obviously like a lot of that was completely mismarketed. That said, on January 7th, he was the lowest peg you can possibly be. All the Democrats had to do was just like back up, let him leave, right? They didn't have to say anything, nothing. But on January 8th, they kicked him off all the internet. A year and a half later, the FBI knocked down his door and stole his wife's panties. The next year, they put him on trial. Then they not necessarily them, but you get the point. Then he gets shot in the fucking face. And probably, like, regardless of where your politics are, the most goosebumps moment I've seen in years. Like, that was just a human moment. It was fucking insane how he responded to that. And then they convict him of felonies that objectively, like, were complete and utter bullshit. It's like they made the guy a victim. They did everything they could to take him from a guy who was not sympathetic to a guy who became the underdog. So, like, is the joke on me or are they just so deranged that they had to do that?
You know, I think something that I've been realizing is like when you keep the volume at 10 constantly, it's going to sound like 1 after a while. You know, they were just going out, I think Democrats, and you're calling this guy Hitler, you're calling him all this stuff. After a while, it just sounds like, okay, what does this mean? And that's something that, you know, even looking back, like the video of, you know, Obama and Trump at the funeral, and they're like, you know, Obama, they're laughing, they're, you know, they're hanging out. And it was like funny to me because I'm like, one, you know, I like Obama and that's great. And I'm like, part of me is like, I'm happy you guys are bringing Trump into the, like, you know, the presidential fraternity because I think he has felt excluded. And I hope that him like being brought into the fold a little bit makes him like appreciate the office more as an institution. And I think it will. But also it's like, you know, you guys were running around the country telling people this guy was like going to be the worst thing in the world. And now you guys are like sitting at a funeral and laughing. People obviously are going to see that and be like, wait, so I guess he's not that bad. And so I think we have a lot of trust as Democrats we need to build back with the American people. But I do think the way that we have kind of, you know, the term like Trump derangement syndrome, it's like I don't like it, but it is kind of true. Like some people have really been obsessed with the guy for so long. I think, you know, the way that we've hyped him up, I think a lot of the Democratic media establishment has not helped out in any way.
100%. What do you think?
The theory is incredible. I never thought about that until you just said it. But if it's true, they really just the mental abuse of their own constituents, because Trump derangement syndrome is real. I have family members, despite what, you know, insidious purpose the media might have. I mean, they are just different people. They look at politics differently. They look at, you know, I mean, everything, every facet of life, race differently, gender. And I'm not saying, you know, we're not talking identity politics, but just the way that they react to just about everything is now kind of geared toward this. how is this either a Trump message or a message that's supported by his loyal followers? And I mean, if the media has this goal of creating this aura around Trump, I mean, they sacrifice their own people to do it. I mean, it's really damning. You know, we're now just looking at your average American and their reaction, a lot of their reactions to who he is and what he's done.
I'm not saying, real quick, Rotimi, I'm not saying that that's not the case. I've seen it too. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. But I do want to be positive for a minute. Something happened here, maybe because of all the victim moments that Trump had along the way, that some people just got exhausted. Great point, Rotimi. They got exhausted by the 10 volume, and they're like, all right. Deep down inside, even the people that hate him and don't stand for anything that he stands for, there's a part of them that's like, well, he was president 4 years ago. He wasn't Hitler. So when he won, you know, me and my buddy Joey Deef and Matt Ferrara were in New York City 3 days later. And we sat outside. It was like a decent night. So we sat outside at the bar, and we were just like, we had walked through all that. We walked probably like a mile through the city, saw nothing. We were just watching the streets and everything. Not one yeller. Not one protester, not one sign, nothing. Everyone going about life. And I was actually like, you know what? I'm proud of America for a minute, because if you remember 2016, you know, there was like riots. I remember those. There were riots in the streets right away. So maybe like all this shit that happened to him, now he's going to come into office. We're going to see what happens there. But it's like maybe the temperature just came down a little bit because things got so out of whack economically and foreign policy wise that people are like, well, it can't be worse.
Yeah, I do think there's kind of this, and I was listening to yesterday, the Democratic Party right now is picking a new DNC chair. It's like an executive of the party. It's not like this isn't like the next president or whatever. But they had a candidate forum with the folks that were running. And it was interesting listening to the folks that are running for DNC chair, because a lot of them are talking about economic policy.
Who's running?
There's a couple guys that really stand out to me. One's Ben Wickler, former chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party. Is really talented guy. Ken Martin, also kind of the same, former state party guy. And there's one guy I actually know pretty well. His name's Faiz. He was Sanders' advisor and is like definitely more on the economic populist way of kind of fixing the Democratic Party, which is interesting. I don't know if he has a shot because he jumped in the race so late, but one thing that stood out to me listening to this candidate forum was there's a candidate that's running that I don't think is a shot, but he basically went on this like rant talking about how the media attacked Joe Biden, ridiculous point. I mean, everyone in the room is cheering, and that kind of concerned me because I'm like, wait, so like, is the base of the party, like the folks that are in the room that are like the DNC members voting, like they actually feel like the media, the establishment media was like change the results, which I think is just a ridiculous assertion. It's like a very wild assertion. One, because the folks that you would need to vote for the Biden-Harris ticket or whatever, they weren't listening to the establishment media anyway. So if the establishment media was putting out the talking points that you wanted, it wouldn't have changed the result. Also, Joe Biden was mentally like struggling. It was obvious to anyone. They didn't like anyone that had
no shit.
Yeah,
Sherlock.
it's like, so that seeing that at the forum, in some of those comments, I feel like we are still dealing with a lot of the residual lies that were told by the establishment. And I think that some Democratic primary voters are still kind of stuck. And that concerns me.
Spear?
I don't want to throw fuel on the fire, but they did turn on him at one point. I remember it was about a week, maybe 2 weeks, and that was right before he stepped down or was pushed out, whatever you want to call it. So at one point they did. You had the same reaction with Hillary, when Comey reopens the investigation, the big surprise. So I mean, they definitely did turn on, but no, the campaign was insulated. The news protected Joe. And again, it was about Trump. It was about ratings. Talking about Joe, isn't exciting, and it's not good policy if you're talking about this guy's struggles, mentally, cognitively. even though I think most of the White House doctors said he was fine cognitively, right? Isn't that what the
Yeah, that's what they were trying to say. And that's the thing, and it really is a scandal. People even talk about like the end of Reagan's presidency, where he was losing it, and they covered that up. And it's right to talk about that at the very end. But like Biden, you had it the whole way, and the cover up of that, or not even, let's even use a lighter word, the not being willing to ask the questions about it, say, no, we don't talk about that. That to me was an enormous trust issue for Americans. Because like the average person, I don't even get, like, think of, this is a bad way to put it, but think of like the dumbest person you know. There's certain things from a human element that everyone's got a bullshit meter for.
right?
And like someone sees that guy talk, he's like, oh, you know the thing. And they're like, that guy should be in a nursing home.
But
it's
it's derangement syndrome.
Yes.
I'm telling you, first of all, I don't know, Jon Stewart, I don't know if he was back at the time, but maybe it was whoever filled in for him. I know they rotated people for a while.
Yeah.
But they were just, mocking the media coverage after the first debate. It's like, yeah, Joe he woke up today. He walked to the stage. He opened his mouth. And he walked out, and no one helped him. And it was just like he did phenomenal. And I had friends and family members saying, "Wow, he really smoked him." I'm like, what the fuck? And honestly, the debates were the reason. I say it to everyone, that was the reason why I did not think Trump would be reelected.
They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats.
I think something funny that now is like, I remember like having a bunch of folks over to watch the Biden-Trump shit show, which was just like, we had fun. We just drank a ton of wine, and it was great. Yeah, exactly. And I remember like finishing it, and I kind of sat with this. I was like, Trump might be president again. Like, time to think about that. But I really was, and I think that's what I'm disappointed to see is that I don't think there's enough frustration with the Democratic Party staff and the folks that hid it for so long. Yes. Because as a Democrat, I feel as if the people in my party have lied for so long. They lied about his mental ability to run a race. And there was a really interesting story that came out today with the New York Times that basically showed that there were members of Biden's staff that had him, pollsters had him at less than a 5% chance of winning, and they didn't tell him.
Yeah. They didn't tell him at all.
They didn't tell Joe Biden. So Schumer went to go
remember.
Maybe he wouldn't remember. But
Joe, they said 95.
Yeah, 5% or 2% milk. What are you talking about?
And apparently Schumer went to Joe Biden and was like, "Hey man, has your staff told you you have a 5% chance of winning?" And then like Joe Biden was like, "Wait, I have a 5% chance of winning." And it's like funny, but it's like, damn, like this dude, no one told this guy. Like, and so I think there's just so many people that need to be removed, and I hope they never work on a campaign today. On the record, I hope you never have another job in a Democratic campaign. A lot of those Biden folks. And yeah, I just think because they created this environment. I mean, it is Biden's fault a lot, but like, when you're a politician, you are essentially operating in a world where you are making so many decisions that you have to rely on your staff a lot. I worked for a member of Congress. I was a speechwriter, and he was doing so much stuff that I was basically tasked with giving him information. And a lot of the folks on his team were hiding the information. I don't know if they were like caught up in their own grandeur of like whatever, but they hid that information. I think, I don't think Biden's on Twitter, like reading the tweets being like, oh, that's how people think. Like, I don't think. Yeah. So
I see what you mean.
He don't even know what Twitter is.
Yeah. Like, I think so. His staff, I think, is partly responsible for this as well. And, I think now that we look at the Trump administration and Trump, I think Democrats for a while were doing this whole thing where they're like, Trump is also mentally declining and yada. But I'm like, I will say I think Trump is obviously a little bit mentally declining, but there's a difference. Like when you look at Trump and Trump is doing his whole weave thing that he likes to talk about where he's going off, it's like he looks like he is in command of the room because he understands the issue and he's rambling like an old guy, but you could tell that this guy knows what he's talking about. Like, but he's rambling. Biden just seemed like he didn't really have a clue. And that's scarier to me.
Yeah, and
so
I think, you know, and you kind of started to say this earlier, but the thing about Trump, looking at the last 9.5 years or whatever it is of him being a political figure now, is that, yeah, he talks like this simpleton caveman, but it's on purpose and it's genius because he's talking to the average person on a level that they can understand and where they feel like he's like a part of their world. This is, mind you, this is a fucking billionaire real estate guy from New York who was able to, and I'll say legitimately, convince coal miners in fucking Altoona that he understood their world because he did. He went to them. For so long, and this was a Democrat and Republican problem. All these people in D.C., in the Uniparty, they looked at these people who lived in, you know, fucking middle America, and they're like, they'll figure it out. They're falling behind the times. They'll learn to code, right? And then you had this guy in a suit who fucking flew out there on Trump Force One and said, no, you've been forgotten about. I'm going to talk to you. And what was he talking to him about? Those exact economic issues, those how do we get more money in your pocket? How do we bring some jobs back here? Stuff that people want to hear and that actually, like some of it, he was able to deliver on. I'm not saying I like the long-term implications of some of those deliveries, but the intentions in that part in his first presidency were good. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously are different because this is interesting to you. You have aspirations, political aspirations. You worked in campaigns, but it was shocking to see that a lot of liberals they couldn't even articulate his policy. I mean, I know he struggles at times. You know, obviously, you know, there's gaffes and you know both sides have them, but they couldn't even articulate his policies. And you know, you have to remember he's going out to these areas. He is policy driven. It's not this rah-rah speech about it is policy driven. And these voters more informed than I am. I mean, I talk to people who don't have a college education. They are in tune with the policies. They know how they're going to be implemented. And I'm sitting there saying, shit. I'm just like country before God now, But, so it shows that it's just the electorate. It's just crazy how it's switched. And I don't know if the left had the same type of political IQ. I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead, Rotimi.
Yeah, I think there's, and this is a kind of longer issue I think the party's having, is there is fundamentally a lack of trust in institutional elite media. There has been for a long time. And I think there are a lot of voters that don't look at that stuff anymore. They're listening to other places, and where they're getting their information from is giving them more in-depth conversations, podcasts, longer YouTube videos, things like that. So people aren't tuning into the 5-minute, the MSNBC, like,
Yes.
roo-rah, we're going to go and like sit around a table and all these pundits are going to yell. People are tired of that. So I think something that I've really been hoping that Democrats are trying to do is actually build an information structure where they're talking about the work that they're doing, the policies they're doing. And I don't think that's going to fix everything. I think at the end of the day, you still have to battle on who has the best idea. But I think once you actually create a media ecosystem that's outside of establishment media and stop being so like obsessed with the New York Times and like who's on CNN and like chasing those moments, and actually building an ecosystem that's genuine and real, you can actually start to talk to some of these people.
Yes.
They have been reaching for so long.
And you know what? There was a huge phenomenon in this election that was like a part of my industry, which is that you had independent media play the biggest role they had ever played in any election, period, let alone a presidential election. And, Kamala was unwilling to go on a lot of these shows. They all asked her. I know that. And it's like even with Rogan, the lack of being able to read the room. I remember when I read the first report from the New York Post about her team met with Rogan's team. And like, if you know how, I don't know Joe Rogan personally. I know people who do, and everyone out there listening who's listening to his show, they kind of know what he's about. The instant you start talking about like, oh, my team, my people are going to meet with, that's not what he does. He's a fucking cage fighting commentator who does comedy at night, right? Like he doesn't like team. He's like, let's sit down and talk. Trump came in there and talked with him for 3 hours. So Kamala was like, yeah, you know what? It's not on my schedule. I can't be there. You got to come to me, and it's only going to be an hour, and we get final cut. And I don't blame him for saying fuck you, right? But when you look at this, the autopsy I was seeing right away with some of the talking heads on the left, not from you, but from some other people, was that, oh, Democrats need to invest in a giant political infrastructure to get their own Joe Rogan and stuff. And I'm like, wait a second. You're totally missing the boat here. It's not money. The reason that Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and these guys work is because they built it genuinely, and they didn't build it being right-wingers. They built it to the point that, like, eventually no one on the left who was running for office would come onto their podcast because they were so afraid of this new medium. So when you talk about, like, oh, when I hear the Democrats like, oh, we're just going to buy our way into our own structure like that, I'm like, no, the fuck you're not. The reason that people listen to my podcast, some idiot from New Jersey who no one gives a fuck about, over all these celebrities with tens of millions of followers who try to start a podcast for a month and can't get anyone to listen, is because I'm a real guy. No disrespect to them, but it's like, I'm a real guy and people just want to hear a real conversation. The Democrats think, some of them, not all of them, some of them seem to think that it's just throw money at the problem, and it's not.
No, I definitely agree with that. I mean, that is something I think, I used to work for a member of Congress as a speechwriter and a comms guy. So, Congressman Dan Kildee is retired now. It's a great guy from Michigan. And one thing that stood out to me, always being a press secretary and being on Capitol Hill working for Democrats, is a lot of comms folks, communications folks in the Democratic world always are very much afraid of letting their boss or congressman go into these places like this, or go into places where you're having long-form conversations because they're like really cagey. Yeah. And it's kind of just like, I don't know if like the personalities of the people in these jobs are like the kids in high school that were just like really annoying and obnoxious about politics, and like we're thinking about becoming president at 12 years old. And when you have someone in that job that thinks like that, they're like, I gotta make sure I'm all buttoned up and I got the talking points here. And that's, I think, a culture of the party. And I think the candidates that don't have that are going to do really well. Like, for example, Governor Westmore in Maryland.
I've seen him on some stuff.
Fantastic guy. And because he's genuine. You see him at the Baltimore Ravens game. He's on the sidelines with his son, drinking beers, like hanging out. It's like, that's a normal person.
Yep.
And
he's
so,
a veteran too, right?
Yeah, he's a veteran, you know? And I think having more people like that, there's genuine that aren't so like, I got to have my talking points and I got to read them. Like, people see through that bullshit. And a lot of people are tired of it.
Guys, if you're still watching this video and you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, please take 2 seconds and go hit it right now. Thank you. 100%. And I think there was also, when you're looking at the people who have done this, who's a guy who for the last 8 years, basically, or whatever, probably 4 or 5 years, has consistently done this on the left? Bernie Sanders. He goes into all these places. He doesn't care who oh, you talked to Trump yesterday, I'll still come on. He doesn't care. And I respect, listen, you don't have to agree with Bernie Sanders politically. I respect the fuck out of that. And like people, I always talk about that 2016 harbinger or whatever the word is, like the signal it was. It's like when you look at the fact that Sanders was probably going to win that would have meant the two candidates who were going to win that year were going to be Sanders and Trump, who politically, when it comes to the ways of getting things done, could not be more opposite. But when it comes to putting, boom, finger on the problem, understanding the pulse of the people and exactly what's wrong, those two guys got it better than anyone because they spoke to the average person. And it's interesting that they're also the guys who are so willing to go on any of these platforms, but the buttoned up people you talk to are not. I need more Mike Spears on the left side. It will just go on there and fucking let it fly for 3 hours.
I hear you. I mean, it's we'll disagree eventually, but I agree. I agree with you.
We'll get there.
This has been very similar, boys.
Well,
we're
desensitized. So, my wife.
He hasn't dropped the Michelle Obama joke yet. That's
why. Okay, yeah. No. I may need to jump in there.
My wife was telling me, we have to fact check it, but she was talking about, she's like, they discovered a new moon. I don't know the context, but we could look it up. Yeah.
See the new moon.
But when I said it, and she's like, and no one really gives a shit. And I was like, you're right. I haven't heard about it. We don't talk about it. And I think the same goes for, our politicians. We've seen so much of each other's lives through social media, the way the media just treats everybody now. Nothing shocks us. So the fact that the Democrats, who were the cool party, can't embrace it is shocking. I mean, it just is shocking.
Yeah, something I've been thinking about, and this is like a very off-the-cuff thought, but
3 new moons.
Yeah, by the way, we have it on the screen. Scientists have discovered 3 new moons in our solar
system. You come to my house, you get my wife's name right.
Wait, it's Christina!
Oh, damn, shit.
Go ahead, Rick.
Anyway.
No, but something I've been thinking about, and I don't know if it's like gonna pan out, but I think like there's gonna be a successful politician down the road that is willing to fully kind of come out and reject this idea of how I think social media has made a lot of people feel this kind of like, there's like a word for it, I think it's like attention capitalism, like this kind of thing where like we're all like really so attached to our phones, social media. You're seeing how it's really like phone bans in schools are becoming like a very popular thing.
That.
And I think across the board, everyone loves it.
Yes.
And I think there's going to be a politician soon that is like, I like reject this kind of obsession with social media, this like technology, the way that it's taken over. I think that type of politician is going to be really successful.
Yeah, that's a good point. I also think, you know, if you're talking about style of politicians that'll come up, one thing I noticed when Trump came up, I would not say it was this way before him, but when Trump came up, and this kind of comes back to like the Trump derangement syndrome, obviously the thing that was most endearing about him to people is that the dude is fucking funny. Everything he does I would watch him read the phone book. I mean, I remember on January 7th, 2021, I'm like, he's still the funniest dude ever. That's not changing. Like, the dude's fucking hilarious. And somewhere along the way, the left couldn't laugh anymore. You couldn't have comedy. You couldn't joke about things. You couldn't make light of stuff. I actually think this hurt Obama because Obama like had a decent sense of humor, and now it had to be so serious every time. Like, Donald Trump's gonna kill America, you know. And like he obviously doesn't actually think that, but like it's not like he thinks Trump's good. But you know what I mean? Like this inability. Like you talk about some of your family members, Spear, that you know lean the other way, and they can't even talk about these things. They can't. There's no smile that comes to their face. Whereas I'll talk with people, even like when Biden was in office, who might have been more Trump people, and they could be laughing. They might be like ripping Biden to pieces, but there's a sense of humor there. And I don't know what happened, because it used to be like, if you're really looking at it, it was like the left that was funny. Like these guys, these Joe Rogans, these comedians who are now, you know, in this last election were like, all right, enough with Biden. These were all the guys who voted for Obama in 2012. And that needs to be weighed there.
Yeah, you saw a little bit of the Obama era when Biden took the Trump hat. I don't know if you guys saw this. He swapped hats.
Yeah.
I honestly laughed, and I didn't even laugh at him. I laughed because I was like, that was probably a moment that everyone in that room felt good.
Yeah.
Now they kind of trusted him, despite what everybody has been saying about Biden. But that was a moment, and I was like, you hadn't seen that on the campaign. You had not seen that reach across the aisle. And I'm not saying Trump did it. I don't think he needed to do it because he had the personality, but that was like the one moment where I said, you know what, if Biden had the mental aptitude or just his staff supported this kind of once in a while, let's crack a joke, I think it would have helped.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's I'm going to mention this funny Trump joke that my friends talk about this sometimes.
You're going to get in trouble on MSNBC.
Yeah.
Did we say that on camera, by the way? I think that was before. You're now an MSNBC contributor?
Yes, contributor to MSNBC. It's fantastic. Right for their website.
But Mike Spear heard that before we got on camera and looked up at me like the end of fucking Usual Suspects. Like we had just found Kaiser Soze. He's like, oh my God.
But there's a really funny Trump joke that, I like Senator Warren. You might disagree, of course. I think she's done some great work on economic policy, but there's a joke that he always makes that Trump made once on Twitter where he was like,
Pocahontas.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the arrowhead. She found it in her backyard. He gave it to Julian.
I could see him biting his tongue.
Go.
No, she basically was like, it was like some campaign ad she did or something, and he was like, she keeps thanking her her wife for being there. Like she's supposed to be there. Like why is Elizabeth Warren thanking her wife for showing up, or husband, excuse me, for showing up at this event. And he's just this very, I think he was just relaxed. And I think
he's supposed to.
Yeah, he just that kind of stuff. I think people saw it and thought it was funny. Yeah. And I as a Democrat would see it. I'd be laughing quietly because I'm I just don't want to. I don't want to see me laughing at this, but it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Rotimi's under the table.
Yeah.
It's you used to have, for example, The Onion. No one hears about The Onion anymore. Now you hear Babylon Bee.
Right.
Right? One was left, one was right. One is right now. And it's there was always the thought that more, I think it's the opposite. So right brain people are creative and more liberal, left brain people are pragmatic and more conservative in general. But not that that's perfect every time, but like the creative people would be the ones who were funny because it requires more creativity and you wouldn't have the comedy on the other side. But now, like in the meme wars, that's a right-wing win. Like they get that like quick comedy so well, and like you see Trump even, and it like he shouldn't be doing it like as a fucking president or guy running for president, but I ain't gonna lie, it's entertaining as fuck. Like when he does like AI videos of like people making out and you're like, oh my god, the left would never, but maybe they should.
Yeah, I think I have some friends who are like very much trying to bring back that kind of like dirtbag left. Like, let's just be ourselves. Why are we so buttoned up? Like, we need to stop being the party of suits. And I think there are Democrats out there that very much are doing this. The problem is that if you act like this as a Democrat, there are a lot of older Democrats in the party that are like, stop being so funny. Like, genuinely, like, stop. You need to take this seriously. This is about our country. It's about democracy and our institutions. And we love and respect our institutions. And it's like, okay, you know what? Like, people clearly are sick and tired of a lot of these institutions because I haven't done anything for them for the last 20 years.
Yes.
So stop being so obsessed with them. But I think there is, and this is why I keep going back to this, I think a lot of the older Democrats have to fundamentally step aside to really let the party have this moment. I think right now the party's having this moment of chaos, like no one knows who the leader is, but I think it's kind of good because a power vacuum, ultimately new leaders rise.
Yeah, it's kind of like you look at traditional liberal stances, right? Because if you look at my politics and you go through the top 200 issues, like I take, what's that aptitude test, that political one? I actually haven't taken it in like a year. I got to take it again. But the one that has like the 4 quadrants and lands
the chart.
you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if people would listen to the show if they saw where I scored on that. But the bottom line, the reason I bring this up is because it's like these traditional liberal stances shifted and it feels so unnatural. So like liberalism used to be the party of no censorship. Now the shoe's on the other foot and they're more the party of censorship. Liberalism is supposed to be the party of my body, my choice, which they are on 50% of it. But the other 50%, when someone talks about getting a shot on something, they're like, no, not for that, right? Liberalism is supposed to be about inclusion, but what they've done is they took inclusion to wokeness, which creates the opposite. It comes 180 all the way around and tries to separate people out. Liberalism is supposed to be the one that's not about endless wars, and actually this is something that is still a problem on both sides, to be very clear. That's everyone's at fault there. And then liberals are supposed to like care about humans and human rights and stuff, but as we already alluded to, like on the border, them maybe with the intention of like, oh, we welcome everyone in here. We are a country of immigrants. I agree. With the intentions being good, the practice is not, because I'm showing you, people are trying to show you like you're creating trafficking crises and stuff like that. So how do we get, like, forget the Republicans for a second. How do we get the liberals to be liberal again?
That's a tough question. I think it comes down to like the talent that gets kind of brought to the front of the party. As I mentioned before, the primary change, I think that if I was like the DNC chair, the first thing I would do is like, we're having the primary in Iowa again. That's the first move I'd make. The second move I'd make is that we need to cut off a lot of the consultants in the party. Because the reason that the Democratic Party is making a lot of these moves is because there are consultants that are being paid like thousands of dollars in DNC contracts to just be like, we saw this poll, so you must do this. Instead of just like, let's actually go out in the communities that we need to win, talk to people and see what works. So I think there are some changes that need to be made. And I think those are two that you can make like institutionally as a party. On some of those policy issues, I think it's just getting back to common sense and just giving people what they want. There's a really, James Carville, he's a former Bill Clinton guy, and now James Carville's like, now he's a little too old, but he used to have this saying, which was the Bill Clinton campaign, is like, we didn't really like, what we did is we went out in the community, we asked people what they want, and then we gave it to them. Very simple. Instead of being like, let's like come up with this idea, we tested in a poll, and like you got some like craven guy in DC who hasn't seen light in like 5 days, and he's like behind his computer being like, I've created the model that is gonna win me the election. It's like, let's just go out in the community and talk to people.
Back then it was, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. Now it's I agree. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Spear, what are you excited about in the incoming administration? I know Rotimi's excited about the entire cabinet.
Oh,
So.
no.
I mean, I think that Trump now has an opportunity to actually fundamentally change the tax code. I think he may be able to galvanize his constituents, make sure that we see some changes, because it is way too complex, especially for small business owners. I mean, they had this mandatory reporting for small businesses. It was laid out under the guise of, well, I mean, I shouldn't say guise, but it was this plan, very, very simple application you have to file if you have a small business. Essentially, the beneficial owner has to be identified, and very simple form. And it was touted as this ability to look and see these terrorist cells that are operating under LLCs, under PCs, whatever it might be. Find out who's really the beneficial owner. Who's profiting, and even this simple idea. I mean, the courts have you had a report by January, I think it was 5th, then you didn't. Now you do. And now there's a good chance that this whole BOI, this beneficial ownership reporting, is washed away. So I think it needs to be simplified, because I think small business owners, it makes their lives difficult.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that. I want to see people get ideas and act on them. Like you did, and I'm coming from a place of privilege, but again, it's running a business that you can see it's not easy, and it's nothing that we learned about. You and I both know that's not a class any of us took in college. So
you gotta learn that in the real
I'd
world.
like to see Trump simplify that. I think that's going to hopefully encourage people, maybe without college educations, go out on their own and take a shot. Immigration reform. I think that I'd like to see, because I see when it works. I have an associate who he's Russian. He did it the right way. Major contributor, to the firm. But again, that's a shiny example. Although I don't know if all Democrats would agree, he's from Russia, but it's an example of how this can work. So I'd like to see some common sense immigration reform. So I'm looking for those two things, and then, I mean, honestly, I hope, and I know he didn't campaign on it, I'd like to see him take down Pharma, knock him down 20,000 pegs.
What do you think of this, Rotimi?
So I think,
it's a great point, Spear.
Any president, you really only have 100 days. I really do think that 180, I think, luckily. And the reason why you have such a short time is because after that period, you got folks in the House that are going to be up for re-election.
Mm-hmm.
So everything you want to do as president, those folks are like, I got to see how this is going to play. I'm in a swing district. I'm like, I got a tough race. So everything starts to get a little tough. So I think for me, the things that concerns me as a Democrat and someone that, cares about some of the programs we have in our government is I think that it's important to make sure we have a streamlined government and we're not overspending. But I think at the end of the day, the two biggest things we have in our government that we pay for are defense and Social Security. And if you want to go in and you want to actually cut, you have to cut one of those two things. That's really where it's going to come from. Elon Musk and Vivek have talked about in DOGE, they want to, cut costs. And I see Elon posting screenshots of these, there's like a $2 million gender studies program, or $500,000, we're paying for someone to research lizards or some bizarre thing. And I'm like, it's great to cut those things, but if you cut those things, you're not actually going to lower the budget. It's a great line item to parade around for, folks that you want to make a point to. But if you really want to actually lower cost, you have to cut one of those two things. And I think cutting Social Security would be harmful for a lot of Americans. A lot of people depend on that money to take care of themselves. So those are the things I think on the spending side I'm concerned about. On the immigration side, I think we obviously need to get some common sense reform. But what I'm concerned with Republicans on that issue is I don't think mass deportation is the solution to the problems we have with immigration.
You're not a Tom Homan guy?
About
for Tom?
I understand Tom, I think, has had a, experienced background in immigration, but I don't think his solution is actually what we need to fix our immigration system. I think we need to deport folks that have committed crimes. I don't think that should be up for debate. And I think any Democrat that wants to come out against that, that's ridiculous, absurd. If you committed a crime, you're here illegally, you should be deported. I think at the end of the day, though, we got to realize that there are people that have been here that came through the border illegally, that have been paying taxes, that are great parts of our country.
They're paying
that
taxes?
Yeah.
Well, into their paychecks.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that are, great parts of our country, that are a great part of our community, that shouldn't be deported. And we should figure out how to make sure they're here legally, and how to make sure that we can integrate them in our community. And, this isn't my idea. This is Ronald Reagan. He proposed amnesty for folks that were here that were here, that had not committed any crimes, that were paying taxes. So I think it's something that I wish Republicans would lean into more, because it's a Republican idea. And two, I just think the mass deportation idea is very expensive. And you're going to have to raise taxes to pay for that. You can't pay for mass deportation without raising taxes somewhere. We don't have the money to afford it.
All right, Spear, can you respond to that, and then we'll come back to the Social Security defense thing?
So I think you first you have to control the influx. All right. So I don't know that it's super productive to focus resources, taxpayer dollars on deportation, and then not address the issue.
Yep.
I met a guy down in San Diego.
San Diego. Wales, vagina.
And he drives it. He commutes. So he comes through the border and he Ubers. He does a lot of different things. Really, really cool dude. Every major golf course you can think of in the world, this guy's golfed at. But lives in Mexico. And, he said, he's like, the shit that I see, he goes, first of all, I'm the only Mexican some days when I'm waiting in line. And I didn't, I thought that was a lot of,
I've heard that.
Holy shit, this is like the most bullshit thing I've ever heard. It's gonna get people rowdy, about the border. But he's saying it's true. So I think the first thing you need to do is address the actual border itself.
Yep.
I think deportation is something that we should be hyper focused on deporting criminals. That comes with challenges. We're against the separation of family, but if you deport a family member who's a criminal, where does things stand? If you deport, let's say it's a male, let's go, stereotypical, he's a breadwinner, taxed, through his payroll check. What now? What are you doing with his, 3 children and wife, or whatever. So I think it's much more complicated to deal with deportation than it is to just address the source of the problem, which is this massive influx. So I would devote my energy to that, and I think that Republicans, Democrats should start there. And then on the back end, there should be enforcement. We should be able to crack down. I think sanctuary cities were a bad idea.
That was a bad idea.
I think it was in that, liberal spirit. Let's create this safe harbor. But I think number one is addressing the actual influx, and number two, addressing, criminals, deporting them. And then I think the third is having more transparency between the local government and the feds. And, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not really up for rounding people up. That's just not where I'm at. I think there's so many other issues when we talk about immigration, and that's not that high on the pecking order for me. It just isn't.
And I got this video on the screen of the Philadelphia mayor, Kenny, back like a few years ago when he comes in. We don't have the volume on, but he's like, and we're officially a sanctuary city.
I hate him.
And I bring this up because you're making a good point, Spear. It's like policies like this are part of what was the issue,
right? In
the sense that, I had Nick Shirley in here, who certainly leans on the right side of stuff, but goes on the streets and talks to everyone, and you can see all different types of perspectives on that. And then my own producer Alessi did some great man on the street content over the summer and in the fall with people in the cities. And when, especially talking with Alessi off camera, the thing that was really eye-opening to him the most is that it was the minority communities that were speaking about immigration more than anything. He's like, the white guys, they talk about economy and stuff, but, some of them would talk about immigration for sure. But, like, he would talk to the people, any minority, you insert minority community here, they'd be like, oh, these fucking immigrants, they're giving them free hotels and shit, and we can't even feed our families and stuff. And it kind of comes back to, it's like, these are some of the same cities. that were saying these things. And then you got a mayor here in New York. I always used to say this to people about Eric Adams. I'm like, watch what he does and not what he says. Everything he says is company line. It's cringy as fuck. He'll talk about like sending vegan chicken to Philly if they beat the Giants and shit. But like the guy is like actually pretty solid. And he inherited the sanctuary city policy, and then he opened his mouth. And common sense got the best of him. And was like, I literally can't take this line anymore. And what do you know? He's charged like a week later.
Yeah.
Like, get the fuck out of here, man.
I will say, so I got two things. I got the Eric Adams point, and I'll go back to the immigration issue. Eric Adams is a very transactional guy in New York. Folks that know him in New York City, like he's very much like, I will give you something if you can do something for me. And I think politicians
Politician?
Yeah.
I would never be like that.
I think a lot of politicians like that, but the ones that get in trouble are the ones that are a little just like way too transactional, where it's like obvious that people are like buying their time like with like real cash. Like most, you know, if you're a politician, you're transactional. But I think his issue is that he is so obviously transactional that he is like a breeding ground for corruption.
But don't you think it's obviously like a little bit funny that weeks after he opens his mouth on this, suddenly he's charged with Turkish airline tickets?
I think it's like if you look at, if like you read the case, you're kind of like, I don't think a New York mayor should be doing that. Yeah. Like it's like a little questionable.
You're right.
Yeah,
he's getting a pardon from
We'll
Trump.
see, probably, and we'll see when the trial happens. It'll all come out. Yeah. But he will likely get a pardon on the immigration point. And I think a lot of Democrats ignored that. And I posted this on Twitter. The New York Times put out a really interesting map, just raw data of counties and their switch. Basically, a lot of switches that happened from blue to red. And if you look at a lot of African American communities, Kamala Harris had some of the lowest black support since 1996. And that, if you're a Democrat, should be scary. One, because you had a black candidate that couldn't get black support. But two, the bottom fell out. You had this whole idea that you could just run this like kind of idea of like, oh, we're the party of minorities and all the minorities would vote for you. But that never happened. And I think on the immigration issue, that especially became clear because you have videos of, black families, Latino families that have been here for years, that are American citizens, are at city hall meetings, and they're yelling at their elected officials being like, the school in the Bronx doesn't have air conditioning. My kid can't walk down the street because there's someone on the corner that's selling drugs. But you guys seemingly are just letting people into the country. You're giving them things. And that idea of disorder, it makes people feel like they're not getting what they're paying for in their taxes. So I think it's just something that I am, as a political analyst and writer and someone that does this, it's almost like I wish I was taking that more seriously. Now, we're here and whatever, but I think that's something that Democrats really have to rebuild that trust because it's lost.
Spear.
I thought it was crazy at the end of the Harris campaign. They turned their sights on black men.
That didn't help.
And I'm sitting there and I'm trying to wrap my head around. Obviously it's very different the way I grew up, and then I think the people she was trying to demonize the way they grew up. But she made it very much so about this. You have a mother, you have a sister, and I'm thinking to myself, I have a mother, and if I have a mother and if I have a sister, it doesn't mean I want to fucking vote for them. It doesn't mean they're qualified to become the president of the United States. So I think that was a big blunder. And then I can't agree with you more about how there's this visceral reaction to, wait a second, you're telling me you're bringing me with you, right? I think that was her thing. You're coming with me. We're on our way there. And
we ain't going back.
You pack your bags, and the first thing she says when we get on the bus is, by the way, we need to really adjust trans rights, and we really need to address this influx at the border. And you're like, wait a second, where am I going here? I'm worried about, Philadelphia. I'm worried about New York. I'm worried about you name it. So I agree. It was so tone deaf. And then to turn and then demonize the same people that she was misleading until, again, I'm telling you, the voters, I think they were some of the most educated voters this year. I don't know if it's social media that makes it so transparent, the policies, but it was very impressive, and there was a bad reaction to her methodology there.
The way that I want to say this, I can't say this on YouTube because we'll get demonetized, but I could say it on Patreon, so I'm going to put this the nice way. I'll say this before Harris got in there because I don't want to make this about her and her being a woman or anything like that. This was to remove her from this. This was something that existed before she was in there. But the campaign messaging of the Democratic Party has become unbelievably feminine. And this is an issue that, like, when I would talk, especially like last summer, 2023, so 2 summers ago, when I would talk with young males, 20, 21, 22, they didn't even necessarily like Trump. A lot of them liked Kennedy, actually. But, like, they were so turned off by the Democratic Party because they're like, this feels like it's just a bunch of women talking. Like, even down to the colors, it's like light powder blue. You know, Beyonce going like this on stage. You know what I mean? Like, there's something about it that I'm not saying go make it male dominant or something like. You got to talk to everyone. But, like, Trump was able to pull in both genders, right? It felt like a stronger campaign. And I feel like the messaging, and I think a lot of it has to do with, like, some of tripling down on the woke stuff that you're trying to get away from, you've talked about today. But I think the messaging has moved so much to that you have a feminization of the party, which, like, when it comes to electing people, this is not, you know, don't take this the wrong way, but not that you want to elect fucking Mussolini or like a strong man like that, but people do respond to strength. There's a reason that, like, short, fat guys don't win the presidency, right? Because they look like, you know, they could get rolled around like the fucking Pillsbury Doughboy. But then someone else, like Donald Trump, I'm not saying he's like the monicum of, like, being in shape. Big guy, aura, dominant, alpha male, right? Like, people want that. They may not know they want that, but they want that.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's something that the Democratic Party has kind of had a tough time talking to young men and men. In particular, Obama is a politician I respect and have for a while, but something that really disappointed me.
Me too.
Was seeing there was a video that came out during the campaign where he was basically, like, talking to this, like, young, like, black guy at an event somewhere, and he kind of was like, it was very, like, talking down to this guy, being like, you got to make sure your friends and family are voting for Kamala, and if they're stepping out on her because she's one, it's like, bro, what are you doing, man? Like, like Obama, like, when you were a community organizer in Chicago, would you talk to the guys that you were working with like that? You wouldn't, because they would have punched you in the mouth. Like, that's what they would have done. Like, you know, like, and so, like, I think we just have to, like, just, like, some of the way we talk to some of these guys, like, younger guys, just, like, not respectful. It's just, like, kind of, like, trying to force, like, we're, like, the HR department and trying to be like, you have to do this, you gotta do this. Like, just tell people ask people what they want and give it to them. Very simple. And I think the Democratic Party has a good economic message. I think that's what young black men want. They want a way to become business owners. They want a way to take care of their community. They want to be leaders, and empowering them as leaders in the economy is the way that we can do that. And I think also talking about how the fact that there are, you know, I liked how you brought up the farm industry. I didn't talk about this.
Oh, we got to come back to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that, and I hope RFK does work on that. Is that there?
You're gonna get fired, my guy, before you start over there.
Here's my thing.
Hopefully, someone's listening.
Here's the thing. I think that on the RFK issue, and I'm kind of going to the place. Something that disappoints me. I will say this, is that Michelle Obama spent a lot of time talking about how there wasn't healthy foods in school and how we need to actually make sure that school lunch is better and healthier. And everyone was like, she's like some communist dictator, like fucking coming in and, like, taking everyone's food. And then RFK does it, and it's like, oh, he's our hero. Like, why hasn't anyone said this for so long? And I'm just like, okay, like, you know, like, that's just kind of bullshit. Like, they're saying the same thing. And so, you know, I'm not sure where I was going here, but I think that as Democrats, the way that we are talking to some of these young, particularly black men, it's obvious. And I think you have seen there's been this slow chopping at, like, black support within the Democratic Party for years. I think this election was another hump of that. But I think if Democrats don't figure out how to talk to black men, how to talk to young black voters, you're going to see a lot of Democratic support, a lot of black folks not voting for Democrats, which is a big fear for me as Democrats.
I just want to say one thing. You know, and it's not just black men. You know, a lot of cultures have that. You know, that mom type that's a little aggressive. That's in your face. Whether it's Italian, maybe it's black culture. Maybe it's Latino culture. Act like it. If you want to have someone resonate, and you want to take this mother figure, what do young men, resonate with? It's authoritarian. It's mom telling you, listen, you can't do that. You can't do this. And I'm not saying that it's got to be just that one lane, but instead of just saying, think about mom, why don't you fucking act like it? Act like mom. Look at Mayor Parker. I mean, holy shit. I don't know if you saw the most recent press conference. I mean, that was.
Can you give context for people?
So
who aren't from the town?
Stuff.
True, right. So Philly, there was this major plan to, I guess, completely destroy a part of the city of Chinatown. Not completely destroy.
Oh, the Sixers.
Yeah. So there was this moment where. The organization, it really had to do with marketing, which I don't want to go too much off on a tangent, but basically the Sixers had no marketing rights outside of the actual arena when they played. So Spectacor, which is the Flyers, they had marketing rights outside of the arena. They have a couple of billboards.
The current one in South
Xfinity
Philly.
Live, right. So that's all really, Spectacor is the company. But anyway, so the Sixers want their own thing. They come up with this plan to demolish multiple city blocks in Chinatown, which is historic. And Parker, she kind of sides, I guess, with this idea, and it's this revitalization of the community. I remember, she gave this impassioned speech about how it's going to change the neighborhood. It's going to draw people back to the city. We'll take pride back in the city. And listen, it was a scenario where instead of because they decided not to do it. So they're going to stay put now. And a lot of people would tuck their tail and run. She came out and was like, you know what? I may have been promised a couple things. There may have been some, some backdoor deals. Nothing unsavory, but like, I'm going to help stimulate your economy. Here's what I'm going to do for your people. She bought in and they flipped the script. And man, she took it. I mean, she leaned into it, and it was an impassioned speech. And I like her. I mean, as far as a Democrat,
Michael Spear, you like a Democrat?
I do like her.
This guy used to wear a God, Guns, and Infidel shirt into the bar in college.
Oh man,
I haven't seen a legitimate protest since she's been elected. So, but I'm telling you, that's the type of person you probably need. Somebody that's not going to tell you, think about mom, act like it, act like someone who gives a shit and knows right from wrong and is going to try to help you. I mean, listen, you have to watch it. We don't have to watch it now, obviously, but watch her most recent press conference. I mean, it was just like, you're like, holy shit.
Yeah, to go back to the Pharma point, though, that you were making, Rotimi, I do think that's interesting, that the flip script, and I talked about that list earlier of things that like used to be liberal that have been flipping. That's another example right there. I mean, you had a Kennedy running with this, who's like a lifelong Democrat too, and they shunned him away. And it's like, a big problem we have, and this exists on both sides, is that people have a lot of trouble admitting where they were wrong. That's why you've been a real heater since the election, because you're willing to do that, which is great. And people are hearing that today too, which I think is awesome. But like, you got to admit that the COVID rollout, which by the way, started with Donald Trump too. This is why I really can't understand it. It was all fucked up. And like, obviously that didn't do what it was supposed to do. And the fact that people were losing their jobs, people were being kicked out of the military, people, not your body, your choice when it comes to this, because, fucking Pfizer's paying us. That to me was like, looking back on it, it's obviously authoritarian. So how do you rectify that? How do you get trust back to people when, it was more the left side pushing that than the right side?
So I think something that on that issue, one of the things I think that is great that pharma industries do is when they're innovating and creating new things that actually help people. So I think Operation Warp Speed was a good idea. I think the implementation is where we have the issues with trust and legitimacy of institutions, and people were forcing people to do things that I don't think they should have been, and we should have been a little bit more understanding of how people feel about getting something jabbed in them. Logically, like obviously people are going to be skeptical of it, but I think it's
Also,
good.
why are you? I'm sorry to cut you off, but like, why were they repressing studies that could show the opposite? Why do you have the White House emailing Twitter saying, "What are we doing about Alex Berenson?" when he's publishing public studies about something that people are going to put into their bodies? Like, what? How do you defend that?
I don't think. I think a lot of the stuff that we saw where the White House was like suppressing information online. I think that's dangerous, obviously bad. But I think at the same time, there was. I think not to like excuse their behavior, but I do think when the pandemic was happening, there was this feeling of the sky is kind of falling. So many people are dying. We need to do something to help make sure that there is correct information out there. Now, I don't think that was the right way to do that, but I think they wanted to make sure that there was some correct information going out there. I do think now we're at this place with the vaccine and kind of the rollout, and what has happened is that a lot of the institutions that were suppressing information, I think a lot of the folks that are involved in that stuff, I think need to really just admit that they were wrong. And I think that's
At
only
the very least.
I think that's the only way to kind of like rectify some of this stuff. Like, and I think the American people have shown that when leaders admit they're wrong, a lot of times Americans will be like, we just wanted you to say it. Like, admit publicly that you were like wrong on this. And so I think that's what I would like to see some of the folks that were involved just being like, we made some mistakes. Obviously, people's lives have been ruined because of that. People have lost their jobs. People have lost things that they've had. So I don't know if that's going to fix it. On the pharma, kind of the larger pharma point, I think that is one thing I'd like to see RFK work on. I think there are extremely abusive pharmaceutical companies that are going out and ruining lives of families, ruining communities. And I think it would be good if we had someone that was willing to go after that aggressively. I frankly think the only way, and I'd love to hear your perspective of this as an attorney, is having actually these companies getting prosecuted is really the only way, because they have so much money and they're only going to respond with force.
Real quick before you get to that, Spear, though, I think you also have to look at prosecuting people, though, who maybe hold power over even them. Like, you have to look at prosecuting an Anthony Fauci or something, because guys like this knowingly, like we can prove it, lied to the American people, ruined lives, ruined generations of children as well for keeping them out of schools, lied about the science of some of the things. And I know there were things that were an emergency. I lived up here when it was breaking out. It wasn't like it was fake. Like, it was real. I knew people who were dying from it. It was crazy. But the way that we also treated it at the beginning was wrong. Like, people were putting people on ventilators right away, for example. That's a huge mistake. We know that. Elon was actually one of the first guys to talk about that because he was providing the ventilators. He's like, wait a second. Once we learned how to deal with it more, it died off. And also, none of us were fucking virologists back then, but now everyone has some understanding of how this stuff works. It's like when a virus starts, it's at its most dangerous. Then it starts killing hosts and it starts going, and this doesn't necessarily apply to every virus ever, but we can point to it with this one. It starts going, wait, guys, stop killing the host, and it loosens up a little bit. So it's not to say like, oh, then it's fine to get it or whatever, but it's not the same as like if you got it on fucking March 13th, 2020 versus getting it on fucking February 20th, 2021. And I think that, it's a great point that there are people at pharma companies that should be prosecuted for, trying to tamp down on studies or hide information or pay off the media even in a clear, open blackmail scheme to say we're going to pool all our fucking funding on your advertisements. That, if you don't push this, it's like, yes, that should be investigated, but we got to investigate the tip of the spear because these people are hand in hand with them.
I'll let you go. And I gotta.
Well, I guess there's no apology coming. Number one, I'm not positioned to debate the medicine science. I'm not a virologist. I can debate the decision-making process, which there were people in power. Fauci could be one of them. He obviously was a major factor in this rollout of, which was it's junk science. Now we know it's reactionary science. so you're not going to get an apology because they thought at the time they were making the most important decision of their lives for the rest of the country. And you're going to stick to that decision. And I think the studies can come out, and we're talking not just losing, development, losing friends, people lost lives. I mean, let's call it what it is. Their health has changed now. But anyway, so I don't know that you're going to get the apology as far as how to battle back big pharma. Anytime we talk about economic freedom, capitalism, what's a free market economy, I always look at, I guess, and I don't specialize in it. I don't give legal advice on this show. I think Julian knows that. There's a disclaimer.
Yeah, me too. No legal advice.
But yeah. I think you probably start maybe antitrust law. Maybe we look at the patents and our understanding of patent law to find out who can manufacture certain medicines, who can distribute certain medicines, and I think that could be a way to break up this pack. That obviously are dictating not only health but policy. And I think that unfortunately you get to a point where it's no longer free market economy. This is now you have a couple hegemons in the pharma industry, and it's a problem. So I think that's the way you can look at it, through that lens, instead of ripping them out of their ivory towers and putting them on the block. I think you have to look at it as really who is this a monopoly?
Yeah, no, something I'd always kind of, I get it a little bit, but something that confuses me with kind of sometimes the way we talk about this is that, Donald Trump was the person during the pandemic that was allowing these folks to kind of do some of this. Yeah. And I think a lot of times like Joe Biden and like the Democrats get blamed, but I think if you like really do think about it, like Trump was empowering these people to make these decisions, but yet he's like somehow immune from any of this.
Let me step in for 1 second,
yeah,
Rotimi, just to because I want to see how you respond to this.
Yeah,
you are right. There is some oversight with like conveniently ignoring Donald Trump's messaging at the beginning of the pandemic. I'll give the same argument though that you gave to defend some people too, which is that you were responding to something unprecedented. You were also right, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, that Donald Trump was the author of Warp Speed, and actually, he doesn't talk about it now, but like even up to like a year ago, he was like, you gotta have your choice, but Warp Speed was, he doesn't like being like that was all fucked up. That said, I think where people draw the line is that Biden wins the election in November, and the whole rollout of what we know is like the vaccine era was them. So like, yes, I think it's fair, and I want you to continue your point right here, but for context, I think it's fair. It's a very fair point to say like, all right, the tip of the beginning began with Trump, which I've always thought is ironic that then the Democrats like stand. I thought they were supposed to have Trump derangement syndrome. They're standing the thing that he did. I'm like, wait, it was like in every direction. It's like the Spider-Man meme, like, why are we doing this? But people have a problem with how it was then implemented during Biden's presidency. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that is like, Biden, picked up, the book, kept flipping the pages, kept writing the story. So I do get that. I think on the point you brought up about prosecuting Anthony Fauci, I think, I guess my thing, and this is something that we brushed on lightly earlier with Donald Trump and some of the prosecutions that were happening to him. One, I think on a lot of the Trump cases, I think the things that he did in New York are like definitely like illegal, but you would not treat anyone that committed those crimes if they were just a normal businessman. You'd be like, pay a fine and just don't do it again. Like you would basically be like, you're good. Like, but you're not going to.
I'm going to side eye you on that
I mean, but like, if someone like fills out some forms wrong, like which is what Trump essentially did, and like fucked up some things like that, you'd be like, pay a fine, keep it moving.
It's like jaywalking.
Yeah, you'd be like, you'd be like, pay a fine, but like keep it moving. You wouldn't like, kind of what happened.
Yes.
And so I think on some of the folks that, in particular, Anthony Fauci, I think if a Republican went and prosecuted Anthony Fauci, I think you are doing some of the kind of lawfare that a lot of Republicans didn't like that Democrats were talking about doing. You're essentially doing some of the same stuff, which I think would really not be the unity that Donald Trump would need right now to govern effectively.
I don't want to hear that, but you have a point there.
Yeah.
You do have a point there.
Yeah, I think, I hope Donald Trump's successful, because if Donald Trump's successful, my life is better.
Bro, he's losing his job.
Like, no, I think just like seriously, like if Donald Trump does well, my life is good. I'm a young guy. I'm hoping to get married soon. So I got like life is happening. I want the economy to be good so I can buy a house one day. So if he does well, things go well for me. But I think there are issues that really do concern me with him. And I think that is one thing, the retribution politics that he talks about, that scares me. Because I think once he starts doing that, we're going to go back to this, everyone's in the grocery store. Like, it was like after I remember the 2020 election, you're like looking at people, you're like, someone's going to like jump me today? Because like, it's just like this very intense, like, country where everyone's at each other's neck. And I think if he goes in with this retribution, like, I'm gonna get after like all the people that went after me, Dr. Fauci and all the, like, I think we could really be at risk at really, I feel like a moment right now where like the country's kind of like, everyone's like, all right, it's fine. Like, people are definitely not happy about Trump winning, but things are calm. At least I feel like. And I think if we like, if he does some of that retribution stuff, I think I think it's dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of Trump supporters. I'm one of them. I'm not looking for the retribution tour.
Yeah.
This is his legacy year, 4 years. So I hope his energy is devoted to policy. As far as retribution, like I said, I'd hate to see him weaponize the feds. I'd hate to see.
I agree.
Him start knocking down the political opponents and adversaries. It's not really. I don't think that's really what a lot of the voters want. I mean, there are some that do. I mean, especially those who were targets themselves.
Yes.
So that's human nature. I can't knock. Some of these figures. Their lives were exposed. They were slandered. But I don't think that's where he's focused. And just to go back to Trump, when you're talking about the pandemic, the one thing that I think he, and it sometimes it kind of adores his benefit is he doesn't want to fail at anything. So he tries to surround himself with people who are educated, who are the leaders in whatever lane we're talking. So if it's virology, you get a Fauci who's he's been basically a portrait on the wall of the executive branch for however many years. So I get it. I get why he brings him to the table. But listen, as a supporter, I can't ignore the fact that, he did like walk away and slink into, you mentioned memes like the Homer Simpson into the fucking bushes. But no, I don't think this will be a retribution tour. And you're right, it is calm. And I'm so thankful for it.
Yes.
I'm so thankful for
it. And you know what? This is actually like, one of the biggest knocks I have on Trump is how he just can't avoid fucking putting his finger in the middle of the burn pit at all times. One thing, though, that I hope repeats this time that he did a nice job of last time when he came in is you remember like how fucking crazy he was on the campaign trail about like lock her up, all this shit about Hillary. But then the moment he got in there, he was like giving her shout outs at the inauguration ball. He's like, no, we're not going to do that. Like he at the end of the day, like whether you agreed with his policies that he wanted to enact or not, he's like, I want to worry about the policies. And I hope there is a lot of that now, because I said I don't want to agree with you on certain people because I might be like just a little angry at someone, but you actually raise an amazing point there, because it would be committing the same sins that I think were committed against him and the people around him, the fucking Paul Manaforts of the world and shit like that. Paul Manafort, that's like 5-year-olds pissing in a swimming pool. There is not one person on K Street on the left or right side of the aisle who did not do everything that guy did. I'm not saying it's like legal, but like they took the guy's life away for like 7 years and he did nothing wrong effectively. You want to clean up K Street. There's so many stories like that of people around him, and like you now don't want to see that from the other side. And you raised a good point, Spear, that there is a human element to it where people who feel wrong are like, I want my vengeance. And we saw that with when Trump left office, and now we're seeing it now with some people, and hopefully like the cooler heads can prevail, because here's the nice benefit here. Donald Trump never has to win an election again. This is where that might be able to help a little bit, because he's like, you know what? I don't need to worry about the poll numbers on whether people think I should lock up Fauci. Like, let's get more money in people's pockets. They'll shut up later.
Yeah, I think he's, and and this is kind of we were talking about this earlier. I think that's why he is obsessed with attaining Greenland, which I think is like,
I love that.
I think it's like, so here's the thing: if the people of Greenland want to become a part of the United States, then they should be they should be allowed to.
Dude,
become
they
part of the
do.
United
Have you seen the
States.
videos?
I think there's like, I'll push back on it. I actually don't think they want to be.
Based on what?
I think there was a Fox News video that just came out. They were going around and people were just like, no. But then I saw like, the Nelk guys like Kyle and they went, and some people were like, yeah, we want to be in Greenland. But, I want to see some polling first. I just want to see like more information about that. But
we're going to send you there. You come back and tell us.
Okay.
It's like it's a Warhawk's wet dream. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like the Cheneys are buying condos.
I want to buy a country. But I think that's why he's thinking, he's thinking about his legacy in the sense that like, the presidents that like add an extra state, like those presidents get remembered. They don't get forgotten.
Yes, they do.
It's like the presidents that add an extra state, the ones that do like really like large policies like FDR, like the New Deal, like Theodore, like, those are the ones that get remembered. So part of me is like, if he is thinking about his legacy, maybe he just doesn't want 4 years of people just protesting every day.
Yes.
Because that is like the worst legacy.
It might. Here's the thing though. It might get renamed Trumpland.
You'll
have to say that for the rest of your life.
I don't want to say that.
It'll be
say California, New York, and Trumpland.
It'll be an AKA.
No, I think stuff like that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Like again, I don't even know the geopolitical, like how that would even work, but like that's not the priority. But if you do that and there's good resources to be had, that's cool. Didn't Obama like make a joke about that in his roast of Trump like 12 years ago, where he's like, "What would that look?" Oh no, it was the White House.
The house is the White House,
right?
So I will say on the Greenland point, something that concerns me about it, the kind of the Peter Thiel folks, some of the tech folks that are in Trump's circle, they want Greenland for, I would argue, nefarious reasons.
And what are those reasons?
And it's resource extraction. Because if the United States has Greenland, these companies can take the resources that are there for themselves. And the Elon Musk, the Peter Thiel, Palantir folks, there's a lot of money to be had there. Just like honestly speaking, frankly.
What did tech guys want with Greenland?
They want the resources,
What
lithium,
resources? Like rare earth minerals?
Yeah, rare earth minerals that are there. There's been studies coming out that they're minerals that could be extracted. And I think that is like, it's basically the gold rush happening, but instead it's not like, Ma and Pa found a piece of gold and now they can send so-and-so to college and buy a new house on the frontier. It's like Palantir just got a couple more millions that they can give to shareholders.
Yeah.
So that's a part of it that I think concerns me. I don't think if we go and take Greenland, I don't think the American people are going to be getting more money in their pockets. I think their taxes will go up because you're going to need to pay for money to actually extract the resources. And then I think the shareholders at Palantir and shareholders of Tesla are going to be able to buy another beach house because Elon and Peter Thiel made some money. So that's the stuff that concerns me about Greenland if it were to happen.
Spear, what do you think of, like, you have a guy like Elon who he's not the richest guy in the world. Like, the Saudi Arabians are the richest guys in the world, let's be clear. But outside of like Saudi Arabia and Vladimir Putin, he's the richest guy in the world, but he has this like Vox Populi, Vox Dei, for the people type vibe to him, which you haven't necessarily gotten from, say, some of the backroom billionaires from both parties that have existed for a long time. What do you think, though, of the broification, if you will, of a lot of billionaires now, whether it be Elon or Mark Andreessen or a guy who's not quite a billionaire like Vivek, but he's pretty close, who are now like there for the everyone and with Donald Trump, when Donald Trump, to his credit, even though he's a billionaire, put that aside for a second, I don't even want to pay attention to that for a second, he's run as like the everyman's guy.
Yeah. Well, George Soros did it before it was cool.
Jeez.
Way before
I was
it was
waiting
cool.
for his name.
All right, it took an hour and 41 minutes before we got a Soros.
I mean, that motherfucker. I mean, he got a Medal of Freedom. He didn't even show up. But I don't know. Like before, I had no opinion about Elon Musk. You asked me, I guess 10 years ago, I have no opinion. 5 years ago, probably no opinion. And then when he comes into this political theater, honestly, the only thing I thought was great. You know, he's giving away money for votes. I mean, you know, but if you're talking about the broification, it's a great term because billionaires they're all of a sudden.
I'm proud of that one. That was good.
That's a good one. Yeah,
The billionaires are all of a sudden the coolest fucking dudes in the room.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. Listen, he's clearly interested in leaving a mark, I think, on public policy as much as he is on I think science and tech. He's the Mount Rushmore already, which is pretty shocking to say for somebody that is still alive when we're talking about it. So I think he now wants to leave his mark on public policy. Not so different from what Trump ended up doing, and he decides at the tender age of whatever it was, 67, 68. I forget when he declared, but
it was 2015, and he's born in 46, so he was like turning 69.
Okay, so that's pretty good.
Wait for that.
Right on brand.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's what he's doing now is leaving his mark on public policy, and I think it worked for the Trump campaign. I mean, it really pulled a group of voters that I think you mentioned earlier. I don't know if we were talking beforehand or this was during the show, but you have this shift, this youth shift towards the Republican side of the political spectrum, and Musk is a huge reason why.
Yeah, man. I think that if you're looking at the autopsy of this election, one thing we haven't mentioned like directly today, even though he's like kind of come up, is the alienization of the left against Elon Musk, which has been a slow slog over the past, I'd say 6-7 years, was the greatest miscalculation ever because he's the cool guy. He's the Tony Stark. Young men especially look up to him. Not to say he's right about everything, but he's like a real guy. He's got that Asperger's, so he says whatever the fuck he wants. And, he had like the most viral media moment in modern history, smoking weed like a bro on Joe Rogan. And it's like, he's cool. And so, and he's really smart, and his science and tech like innovations are fucking incredible. So when you see this, it's like, I see like Rachel Maddow come out 6 days before the election and say, if Trump loses, we got to cancel all Elon's government contract. Like this is not the way.
No.
So I'll say this on Elon Musk. There are things that I really like about him, and there are things that I really, really don't like about him. I think on the science technology front, I think the work that he's doing is great. I think, especially if you're a liberal that's concerned about climate change, there's no way that you cannot be impressed with the work that he's done with electric cars. There's undeniably, you cannot say that isn't impressive in some way. I also think like his kind of like ethos around being multi-planetary is super cool.
Yes.
I think that's how I want the smartest people in the country to be thinking about the stuff I want to be thinking about. I want to be thinking about how to innovate, how to make sure America stays on top of science and technology, thinking about cool things like going to Mars and investing and thinking in that way, I think is awesome. What concerns me is his use of Twitter as a political tool, in the sense that if you own a platform like that, and you have a really, really strong political opinion, I think it's dangerous. And I think that Democrats have done this too. I'm not going to.
Yeah.
It would be. Yeah, it would be.
Spear's biting his tongue.
It'd be, BS for me to sit here and say that I bet everyone already saw this already, but the Zuckerberg interview with Rogan where he talked about White House officials calling Facebook, yelling at folks. Like, Democrats have definitely done the same thing. But I think it's, that's what concerns me about Elon, because when you have that much money and you're putting your finger on the scale in politics, you have more influence than any of us here who are just talking. You can actually move votes. You can change countries and the way that they move. In Germany, you're already seeing him get involved in the election there in England. And what's crazy about his involvement in Europe is like, they don't have like people spending all that money on elections usually. So when someone like him comes in and they're like, oh, I'm going to drop all this money, it's like, they're kind of like, we've actually like, what are we going to do? So that's the stuff that concerns me about Elon. I think in terms of his role within the Democratic Party, it's really funny. There are like great pictures of him and Obama hanging out.
They got along.
Yeah, they were great friends. And Obama was like, this is a young man who's like an immigrant and we're going to like uplift him. And, I think there are a couple different things that stood out to me in his story of leaving the Democratic Party. I think the first one that stood out to me is I think personally he's politically very much not he has politically complicated views about transgender rights. That is something that I've seen. I think one of his family members, I think, is trans.
Yeah, one of his sons.
Yeah, and so I think that has caused a lot of I think politically he's out of step with the Democratic Party there. But I also think there were some moments during the Biden administration that disappointed me. Like there was, I think it was an AI conference or something. They didn't even invite the guy.
Oh yeah, it was worse than that. It was like an electric vehicles conference.
Yeah, and it's like, you know what? I understand that you are out of step with him on a civil rights issue, a social issue, but he's an innovator in that field. You got to invite him.
Also, a low polling social issue, I might add. One of the reasons they lost the election.
Yeah.
People don't care. People are like, all right, you want to be trans, go be trans. I don't need to hear about it. You know what I mean? And that's another messaging point, because it's like, all right, you're going to hold something like that against the guy who also, like, he had feelings about one of his kids that he felt like was put in a bad position to make a poor decision when they're young that they might regret later. Like, as I'm not a father, but like I totally feel him on that. And if you're gonna alienate someone for stupid reasons like that, you're gonna get what you deserve. But you do make a really good point about using the platform as a political tool, which also, to your point, has been done on the other side far more. We were just talking a few minutes ago about retribution in trying to jail people and whatever, and having to try to be the bigger man and not do that. No pun intended, right? I've thought that since the beginning with Elon, because I'm like, I love that you took a platform back that was experiencing insane censorship to try to stop that. Don't then use it to become some of the things that you hated. And I hear his frustration. He's a human being. He's been pushed by these people to where he is. They literally pushed him away, said, you're not allowed here, and say you got to cancel all his contracts on national TV. So I get it. But like, if you want free speech to win, this is a crazy thing to say, but I said this at the very beginning when he first bought it in 2022. If you want free speech to win, and that is your actual goal, and you are a powerful person who's trying to enact that goal, you may need to consider that in the process of trying to make that win for the whole, you need to sacrifice your own, which is a dangerous thing to say. But I still feel that way 2 years later, because it's like, I get why you got involved. Maybe some of it was for the good. But like, if this keeps going like this, how could this? I don't know how it plays out, but that does make me nervous.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as. I mean, you rely upon these different platforms. It's part of your work, right? Yep. This is something you do every day. Yep. You do it as well. More in that political arena. But yeah, I don't really. I'm not a huge social media guy. I look at it pretty black and white. You have these monsters, all private, and they're deciding what to put out there, what not to put out there. They have their own rules and regulations and policies. I mean, I definitely get annoyed when they pick and choose when they're going to apply it. I get annoyed when the government makes phone calls like we talked about. Why are you not censoring this?
That's right.
So, I get it. I'm not, I guess, as concerned about, his use of it. At the end of the day, it's his toy. If you don't want to play with him, then leave, There's not great alternatives out there. Brings up like TikTok. I know, there's these, alternative platforms. I can't remember. My wife just rattled them all off. Like Red something is one of them.
Red Note. That was my 6-year-old cousin downloaded me that.
Yeah. I think that these companies, if they pick and choose how to apply the rules and regulations, they're going to devour themselves. I think governments are going to help them, set the match or light the match. So, but as far as what Musk is going to do with it, listen, it's his toy. If he wants to kind of turn the tables, then fuck it, let him do it.
Rotimi, how would you, seeing as we've seen some of the censorship or louder speech, I'll even say, fall on different shoes now over the past decade especially, how would you solve this? Would you just let it, I mean, First Amendment's supposed to be public square, speech wins, and that's what I think, but would you make it would you put into legislation that the government cannot get involved, like quite literally, like force them by a piece of paper to be like, you cannot do this?
Yeah, I think that is something that I think is I've been kind of all over the place on this as I like learned more, but I agree. I think that's where I would be on it. I think though what we have to see then is social media companies have to figure out how are we actually gonna like handle like some of the like violent and bad shit that's happening on our app. And then it's like, how do we define bad shit? That's like, and that's a whole debate. In the sense, there's some reports coming out that he may have his own office space at the White House. Of course, I don't know.
Well, he is running DOGE. I mean,
well, so I think the interesting thing about DOGE is like they're calling it a government department, but it's more just like kind of like a Blue Ribbon Commission. It's almost like the Manhattan Project. So Manhattan Project was basically how we ended up creating the nuke, obviously. But for you to have a government agency, you need to have Congress and Senate ultimately approve it, that legislation,
right.
And then so it's not a real government agency. And so when
that's kind of the point, though, no?
Yeah, I guess, and so the interesting thing even about DOGE is that it's really an idea that, and some people may not like this, it's completely stolen from Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton was elected, and folks will not like this, but look it up. When Bill Clinton was elected, him and Al Gore started a commission for government efficiency. I believe it was nicknamed NPR, which is funny. And they started this commission to basically research government efficiency and figure out how can we cut cost, how can we make the government run more efficient. And their biggest kind of takeaway was they basically made the government like have internet. That was like their whole kind of investigation. Yeah, National Partnership for Reinventing Government. Yeah, so it's like it's a completely it's an idea that is good, and so I think it makes sense. My issue is it being run by someone like Elon Musk that has his own interest and motives. At the end of the day, per U.S. law, as a CEO of a company, his number one goal is maximizing shareholder value of Tesla shareholders. That is his priority. That's what he has to focus on because we're a capitalist country, and maximizing shareholder value is how we believe as a capitalist country we can innovate for the best.
Now, here's devil's advocate.
So yeah, go ahead.
They've announced that they want to do, he and Vivek, they want to do a weekly podcast where they go through everything they did there for transparency purposes. Does that change your opinion a little bit?
No, I think that's fine. I think, as I mentioned before, I think what would happen on this weekly podcast, if I could predict, they would be like, we found this like $300,000 program, $100 million program where someone was like investigating or researching something that seems kind of dumb. Like, he'll post these things on Twitter, like someone was researching lizards and like something really obscure that makes no sense. And they'll be like, we cut that program. And at the end of the day, that is not a real cut that actually impacts the government budget, because the biggest parts of the government's budget are defense and Social Security.
You just brought it back. We got off this. Let's come back to it now.
And so I think like if you really are gonna like cut costs, you have to cut something in those areas. And those are two areas where a lot of people in Congress don't want to touch, because you cut some defense funding, you got a lot of Republican congressmen who are getting calls from Lockheed Martin and Palantir and all those guys saying, you're cutting my line item?
Yep.
I've had that line item for years. You cut Social Security. You got Democrats and Republicans getting called from their constituents being like, I'm reading on the news that my Social Security check is going to get cut. So those are tough. Those are tough things. And I don't really think that they're going to be able to make the kind of impact they want to make because I don't know if they're focused in the right place. I think they're both smart guys. They obviously have been doing this kind of stuff. I think Elon in the private space is good at going in and cutting costs and making companies run efficient. I'll even say when he went to Twitter and he was like, I'm going to fire everyone and it's going to work. I was like, you're a bullshitter, dude. It's not going to work. And I can open the app. It's still working. And he cut a lot of people.
That's true.
So I do think he does know how to do this in companies, but I just don't think it's the same way. I don't think it translates well to the government ultimately, but.
Yeah, again, we agree. I mean, I don't think they're going to be effective at really cutting the most bloated areas of the budget. I don't think they have the resources. I don't think that's the intended purpose. I think it's going to be more of, you mentioned, comedy earlier in politics. I think it's going to have that flavor. It's not like I'm going to entertain. It's going to entertain me. I mean,
it'll be funny.
It'll be funny. I mean, I know there's, people on the left who probably are going to be crying about some of these cuts and it could be racism. It could be, this ignorance of climate change, however they want to couch it.
African American studies minor.
Yeah.
But
seeing it come
they're
out.
they're not going to make a dent, I think, in the bloated areas. And, the other problem, that we have is, again, I always wonder, you have this at the forefront, it's a talking point right now, what are they going to bolster, and are we going to know about it, and how is it going to apply to the everyday American? So I don't know. This administration has made a lot of promises, but I'm almost skeptical and wonder, is there some other motive to bolster different programs that maybe the public in general isn't a fan of, or they're not fans of? And then use this as a platform to say, well, look over here, what we're doing, and all of these different cuts we're making.
Right.
So,
yeah, and the poison pill, which is what I'll call it, it boils down to the largest percentage of government spending comes down to the two things, defense and Social Security. On the one hand, with Social Security, I remember when I was on Wall Street, a guy had a great quote, and I don't see how he could possibly be wrong, and it's an incentives problem. He goes, if you want to guarantee you're going to lose your next election, if you are in any kind of constituency that's not literally 80% one way or the other, cut Social Security. You're gone. Yep. So all these fucking people in D.C. are incentivized not to do that. So it's like, well, that's out. And also, I understand, because so many people have paid into that tax their whole life, and suddenly you're going to be like, oh, you've been paying Social Security tax for 45 years. Fuck you, it's gone.
Yeah, but there was a time where you were paying for your eventual retirement. You're not doing that anymore. So the money that you're setting aside is being used now. So it's not like you're saving. This isn't a piggy bank. So if you don't have enough people paying into it and too many people taking out, which is the whole baby boomer issue, it's a failed system. So instead of, again, head on, let's think of an alternative instead of just avoiding the conversation. And it brings up your point, which is, again, who's running the show? Is it the people that are about to benefit from Social Security, or their friends who are going to benefit from it, or so they need to think of a creative solution. It's not ignoring the problem.
Yeah, likely if you are under the age of 40 or you're listening to this podcast, you actually likely won't have Social Security. Us in this room, we probably won't because the program has basically been funded in a way that makes it defunct, and they haven't been able to figure out a funding stream that actually brings in revenue, so it exists for like millennials, Gen Z. So I think that's like a real problem, but I don't see either side talking about that because they're focused on like now, which is like, how do we like make the boomers happy, which is like annoying. But yeah, I think I agree with your point on the Social Security funding problem. It's completely us just really running away from the problem. On kind of the DOGE point, something that's interesting. I found this out from a friend who works in the science space, and completely random. The way that they figured out how Ozempic was this changing drug that could lower, figures out weight loss is they figured out that lizards reproduce a certain type of blood in their stomach, and they took that information and used it to make Ozempic. And obviously they had to at one point fund a government study for researching lizards and their digestive system. And I bet if a lot of us saw that, we'd be like, why the fuck is the government spending money on lizards? Why are we doing that?
This podcast is sponsored by Ozempic. Go get it today and lose 100 pounds and look like a gaunt face.
And I think Ozempic is like, I think Ozempic is like questionable drug for moral reasons. I'm just going to caveat that. I'm not like here saying go home and put the jab in your ass. Like, I'm going to be honest. Like, that's not my position. But I think, innovation like that is like important. And I think it's like good for us to be doing things like that. So I would caution people when you do see when you start to see those like DOGE screenshots of them being like they're cutting research here. Like it may seem like that research program is stupid in the moment, but like it could have long-term effects. Like that's how we find things in this country. That's how we innovate. That's why we're one of the best countries in the world, is because we have the resources to like play with some of that money and be like, we're just gonna spend a research project here. And like I do get, though, people don't want to see their money being wasted because it frustrates you when you can barely afford groceries or you're having a tough time saving up to buy a house or saving to go on vacation. The government's spending millions of dollars researching something that appears really stupid. But, these are trade-offs.
It's also like it's very hard to root out dead weight. And what I mean by that is when you look at government jobs, let's use the DMV as an example. That's everyone's favorite example. You have people who can get the cushy job of like making decent money, nothing crazy, but they make a living. They know they're going to pay their bills, and they got this job that then doesn't incentivize them to work hard or be nice because there's nowhere to go. It's just kind of they stay in the same place. So when you're talking about cutting things, yes, you can maybe find programs certainly that are like a total waste of money or the government shouldn't be involved in this, leave it to the private sector. But then I don't know how you're going to attack the problems head on of like incentives because the government, unfortunately, because you're dealing with taxpayer money, and I understand this, you can't suddenly become like a corporate system and say, well, if you do a good job, you can rise and get a $50,000 promotion from associate to VP. They can't do that. I mean, the guys who get highest up in like some of the major agencies make no fucking money. Jim DiOrio like lists off his fucking check every time, like down to the cent. He's in here. Guy rose up high in the FBI, but there's no money with it. And that's also why a lot of people then go to the private sector, in those types of parts of it. But cutting the dead weight within government programs that are necessary, like I don't want to admit it, but like the DMV obviously is necessary. It's tough because like you can't change incentives.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There was this, I used to work on Capitol Hill for context, so I follow a lot of this stuff closely. It's very ridiculous and dumb, but these like group of like progressive like staffers like put out this thing like, we only want to work 32 hours a week. And it was just like kind of like the like dumbest crap I've ever seen. But I think I say this because there is this like kind of thing about the government is like no one wants government staffers to be paid more. But the thing is, if you want the best talent, it's like you gotta pay for it.
Yes.
But it's like it's kind of this like tough thing. It's like people don't want to see we're giving staffers and congressmen a raise. But it's like if you want better talent, you gotta pay for it. In the private sector, that's what they do. And that's why you have these companies that are able to innovate and do this cool stuff because they're paying people.
Well, that's also the point of the second boogeyman here you were talking about. We just talked about Social Security, but then you talk about defense spending, which is this cycle that then creates these endless wars because we keep paying what? These private companies billions and trillions of dollars to do this shit that incentivizes them to want these wars to happen. They then funnel that money back like a laundromat, pun intended, to then pay the candidates preferred that they want across the board that are going to support this type of spending so that they continue to be able to report their good quarterly earnings. And it's like that's how you end up with these wars that politicians suddenly are incentivized not to want to stop. The people that like want to stop these wars are like the hardest left politicians and the libertarian right. All the other people on the left and right are like, yeah, we have to support the good people of Ukraine. Listen, I'm not saying Ukraine's not in a sympathetic situation, but there's also like some logic here where you could end this war. You could stop all this killing and you could stop these fucking companies from making money every day. And it's like, not to be cynical, but you think back to Eisenhower's speech when he was leaving office. That was fucking 60 years ago. And what's changed?
Yeah, I mean, these companies that you're talking about, I think that there's huge domestic implications by stripping them bare or I guess investigating, to extreme lengths, or following the money. They're employing tens of thousands of people. I think that they have some of the most brilliant engineers in the world. I think the innovation doesn't stop at, missiles or munitia. I think that there's a lot of things that they can do to contribute to the science space and obviously, military. I think the problem is, again, it's not just the defense industry. It's pharmaceutical industry, insurance industry. Money in politics. It just doesn't mix. It doesn't. Generally speaking, it doesn't benefit anyone domestically other than the top.
That's right.
And then abroad, it could be devastating. Like what you see in Ukraine. Although that's, in my opinion, instigated by something different. But I don't look at the defense industry as a boogeyman. I don't. I think that the application, scientific application is enormous. I don't, if Musk was in defense, obviously he would be in a totally different boat. But I think there's a lot of opportunity. Do we need to spend as much as we do? Probably not. But do I want to strip it down? No. I'm not looking to do that.
So we have two big parts of the budget that are going to be hard to actually, I'm going to make up a word here, but efficientize. So how do you, and that's, I hate to be cynical about stuff, but it's like, then how do you even fix it? We just keep going more and more in debt, and at some point that's got to explode.
Yeah, that's something that, like, I'll be completely honest, that's something that I am, like, actually right now trying to read more about. I just can't. It just seems like the debt issue we have in our country is just like a disaster that, like, we're just gonna have to deal with when we're older and our kids. It's like, it just seems like a very depressing slope riding down, unless we cut one of those two things. So it's like, or we, and this is what I have, this is something that Bernie Sanders and folks on the left side of things say that I really agree with is, if we're actually gonna fix some of these issues, we need to maybe raise taxes on the billionaire class, and folks in our country that are generating a lot of wealth, and are clearly not using that wealth to innovate, which is like what they're like supposedly claiming to do. Is they're hoarding that wealth. They're buying properties in New York City where no one lives, buying properties in cities and just like leaving it there so they have an investment vehicle. And maybe we should be taxing them to pay off some of that debt. I think
there's a lot of foreign billionaires doing that, by the way.
Very true. And so that's something that I think needs to be talked about more, is actually having billionaires pay their fair share. That's something that Bernie Sanders has talked about for a while that I really have always thought is great. It was funny. Biden brought it up in his last speech that no one watched. And it was like, yeah, well, maybe you should have been talking about this for, maybe if you could talk, maybe
like
you should have been.
Also, like 2 days after he gives a medal to George fucking Soros.
Yeah.
But that's neither.
He didn't give it to him.
Yeah.
He gave it to his son. You're right. Yeah.
And that's something I think that is tough about Democrats on this point is, you can sit here and talk about how billionaires and money should be in politics, but when you're going out and you're giving medals to George Soros, you have corporations donating so much money to your super PACs, the message about how money shouldn't be in politics, it seems super hypocritical. And that's why I liked one guy's running for DNC chair, Faze. He talks about this a lot. And how we actually, as Democrats, need to be a party that's not actually beholden to corporate interest, because people will see it. And it's just hypocritical right now. We're like, oh, no billionaires. But it's like, you guys have had George Soros donating and bankrolling all these DA races across the country, doing all this stuff. And now you're saying no billionaires because you lost the election. It's hypocritical.
Yeah, but even at like the defense side of things, like you talk about that Spear not wanting to cut some of that, and I hear you. It's like I lean both ways on this too, because I want to be ready if we ever had to, and then I hope we just never have to. But it's like, another point is that a lot of these guys talking about incentive structures, we've set it up now where they can rise up through the ranks and do like a nice job at 3-letter agency X, and then go get hired in the private sector for fucking 40 times the price and now be rich as fuck, but be read in and securityed in as a contractor where basically they keep their desk. Like if I'm at Langley, I leave the CIA, huge air quotes there. I go to Lockheed Martin. I'm now a hot shot there along with another fucking 1,000 CIA guys. And we get to do our jobs that taxpayers pay for, but they don't realize they're paying individuals because it's all being paid to a company who distributes that by salary. And then we get to impact national security by still working for our same company, in this case, like the CIA. You see how it's like this circle? And then that being like the biggest industry that pays down government, it then extends to every other industry where there's a back and forth sliding door. We see it in tech. We see it in pharma. We see it in everything. So, like, how do you get rid of that?
I'll let you go.
Yeah, far away.
Yeah. I guess my one thought with something I think about this sometimes with that is maybe I think it's like actually paying government folks more. Because if you actually raise their salaries, you don't have the incentive to leave. Because the big reason why folks leave is because they want to get paid more, because they want the paycheck. But it's by raising these, if you're in the CIA, you're in the FBI, it's like actually giving them a wage that's like good enough and matches their progression throughout the agency, so they don't have to go to like Microsoft or whatever other company or Palantir so they can get the payday, and then you have that revolving door, and then it just all seems corrupt. But it's like if you pay government staffers more, they won't have to leave. But then no one wants to pay the government staffers more because that just feels wrong. So it's like we're in this circle of just like not fixing the problem. That's my solution. But no.
I mean, you kind of are hyper focusing on a really, I guess, it's like a morally icky type of situation, you know. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's look the other way, you know. But again, I'm a pretty big proponent of American exceptionalism, and I think that the defense industry, did prop us up, for many years, and I think the one thing that we've reached, we were talking about billionaires, we were such a competitive country, and it was everything we did was rooted in competition. And I think that once we made it, so to speak, we kind of looked around, did a Travolta, what's going on here? It's just me. And that's again why when I look at pharma and maybe even the defense industry, when you get to a point where there's no longer competition, I'm telling you, this is not a socialist ideology. This is true capitalist people that believe in. There's a point where it is too big. It is too massive, and
Rockefeller.
There's a lack of competition. So I think that should be a theme with the Trump presidency. I think that we should kind of shine a light on that sort of economic issue, and I think you'll end up getting what you want, which is you'll have new companies emerge, you'll have government contracts spread out, and maybe you don't have two people grabbing ears and whispering sweet nothings. You'll have maybe 10, 15. You're still going to have that money and politics problem, but I think that one way you can tackle this is by kind of redistributing the opportunity.
Do you think Trump can end these wars?
Which?
The two big ones, Israel and Ukraine.
I think no. The war in the Middle East, it's a religious war. It's I think that if Trump thinks that he can accomplish this in 4 years, then what the left says about his ego is true.
We're gonna make a deal.
It's just not there. I mean, I think that he should, make an effort at kind of ending some of the violence, ending some of the human rights issues. It's hard to say though that he's going to end it. I think the Russia-Ukraine, I think that he can end it effectively. I hate to say it. It's not a popular opinion, but I think it's with a land grab. Russia gets a piece of what they're looking for. Yeah. And I think that's the way you end it. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, it's not going to stop there. It's not going to stop there. And maybe they're right. But if you want to stop it now, I think that there has to be concession. It's territorial. And, it goes back to that point. It's, every line that you see drawn it's been bumped. It's been twisted. It's been shrunk. It's been enlarged. So, I think that's the way you do it. But it's not a popular opinion because then Putin wins.
Yeah, it's not a popular opinion. The thing that at least gives me a little bit of hope with any concessions vis-a-vis Russia and all that is that the difference between like Russia, if you view Putin as really bad, and I do think he's a bad guy, but like the difference between them and like Nazi Germany is Nazi Germany was becoming the biggest economy in the world with the greatest innovation, right? And so giving them land was essentially like, giving fucking Michael Jordan, giving Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan and LeBron James a chance to play together. Russia has an economy the size of Italy. So there's room to work with there. But I understand why people have like a bad taste of like, well, we don't want to give them anything. You got to be a little bit realistic though, because frankly, he did take Crimea in a bulletless takeover fucking 10 years ago. So like if we could say like, all right, you're going to keep that, you get a piece of the Donbass. And then, all right, Ukraine can't join NATO, but there's something to set up a disincentive for Putin to ever be able to do that again. You have to look at that deal, no?
So on the Ukraine front, I definitely do think at this point, it does. you have to talk about a deal at some level. I think it makes sense for the lives lost in Ukraine. I think also at this point, the American people, they're feeling about the war and they are paying for it, some of it. So I think that conversation has to be acknowledged.
Got money for wars, but can't feed the poor.
Exactly.
That man right there.
Love that man.
Yep.
And so I think it has to be acknowledged. I do want to say on this front, Putin, when the war started, said it'd be over in a week. Now, I want people to imagine a world where basically you had Donald Trump in office saying, we're going to take Canada. And he sends... And he's like, it's going to be done in a week. We're going to do it in a week. It's going to be fantastic. And he sends American troops to Ottawa. And you basically have a situation where you have thousands of American boys dying in the Ottawa woods, just getting like destroyed constantly. Inflation hikes up to like 18%. And this is basically what's happening to Russia right now. You wouldn't be going, oh, like America's winning the war. You'd be like, they're getting crushed. So I do think that Russia is losing the war, and I think it's tough for people don't want to say it, but like if he said it was over in a week and still going, losing so many soldiers that they got to bring in North Korean soldiers that are getting sent to Ukraine, and you give these guys a phone and they literally just like, wait, there's porn on the phone, like, and they're just like, I don't want to be involved. I want to give me the phone back. So like, I think that shows how desperate they are. So I think for me, I would keep giving Ukraine some defensive weapons, but I'd say we have to figure out a timeline to ending. Yeah. And I think the first thing I think needs to happen is there needs to be communication between Zelensky and Putin. I think that's how you start the conversation about a deal, because what is bad is when no one talks to each other, which is what's happening right now. No one's saying anything. And that is making it worse, and that's prolonging it. And so I think first, above anything, I hope Trump can start some type of dialogue. People just have to start talking.
100%. And like, I understand like Zelensky hates Putin and Putin hates Zelensky and whatever. It's hard to get people in a room. The benefit here is though, to me, like Zelensky doesn't have much of a choice because he's a client state. He wouldn't exist without us and the West. So like, you walk in there, you say, my guy, you're going to go in that room. He can sit there and be like, no, we're not. Yes, the fuck you are. Because guess what? You're going to get no money if you don't. And someone's got to stand up to do that. If it's going to be, I don't care. I don't give a fuck who it is. I don't care if it's Trump. I don't care if it's Biden on his last day. Somebody do it. You know what I mean? So, I don't think anyone wants to see endless wars. I think there's been a lot of good established thoughts today too, by the way, coming from your end as well, like, as far as like just some common sense, like let's take a chill pill here and use this as an opportunity. Like, I don't know about you, but this conversation's given me like a lot of hope or at least some, like in the future of our politics, because it's just been politics is so annoying over the last decade. It's just rah, 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 rah. We gotta calm the conversation. So I appreciate you guys having a lot of agreement today, by the way. It's kind of cool.
This is fun.
Right?
Common sense.
That's what it is.
We might have to do this again. I gotta take the training wheels off Spear next time. I could tell he's holding back.
We gotta have some more. Yeah. I'd love to get into. We had a Epstein. That was on the table. And,
We'll do that again, and also because I didn't do it this time because it was your first time you were popping your cherry with Mike Spear. But like, we'll get some whiskey flowing next time. It's gonna get dangerous. If people never saw episode 39 or 77 or 128.
Now roll Michelle on Ellen.
Jesus Christ. You guys are gonna kill me.
And with that, everyone else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Thank you guys for watching the episode. Before you leave, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. It's a huge help. And also, if you're over on Instagram, be sure to follow the show at Julian Dorey Podcast, or also on my personal page at Julian D. Dorey. Both links are in the description below. Finally, if you'd like to catch up on our latest episodes, use the Julian Dorey Podcast playlist link in the description below. Thank you.